Industrial products like these would definitely require after-sale service and repairs. And customers would have to come to me for those repairs. Even if someone eventually copied my repair tools, it wouldn't matter. That was exactly what I wanted. I could use that advantage to standardize the entire market around my own rules. Helena Carter had always been confident, bold, and aggressive, but her venture had ended in absolute disaster. If she hadn't had Sunrise Group behind her and his sharp business instincts, her company would have gone bankrupt and been liquidated long ago. There was no way it could have survived until now. But after looking through Tyler Carter's proposal, Charles Carter found it refreshingly different. It wasn't that Tyler's proposal and business plan were particularly innovative. They were simply extremely practical. For a research and development team of only 5 people, he didn't set unrealistic expectations. In fact, his first requirement was basically to copy what already worked. Innovation was encouraged too, but everything had to be completed within the deadline. Second, he wasn't trying to build his own production line. Instead, he planned to source everything from the existing market, using products that were already mature and reliable. If something wasn't available, he'd have a manufacturer custom produce it. Third, his performance targets were completely different from Helena's. Helena wanted her first electric motorcycle to accelerate from 0 to 62 in 5 seconds and reach a top speed of 300 kilometers per hour with excellent handling, plus smart features like lane assistance, and so on, while Tyler's requirements were incredibly simple. First, it had to move and stop. Second, it had to turn. Third, it had to carry both people and cargo. As for the detailed requirements, first, its top speed couldn't exceed 60 kilometers per hour. Second, its payload capacity had to be at least 200 kilograms. Third, it had to be rechargeable at home. That last requirement, in particular, being able to charge it at home, allowed him to completely bypass charging stations, and with a top speed below 60 kilometers per hour. It wouldn't even qualify as a motor vehicle under the speed regulations. Judging from the photos, the second prototype even had pedals. He was obviously trying to sidestep motor vehicle regulations entirely, if he could really pull this off. Now, he'd already built the first prototype. Next, all he needed was to finalize the manufacturing process and get the product approved. Then he could launch it on the market. Charles narrowed his eyes. He could already imagine where this product might go. Tyler's adoptive parents both worked within the government system, and his friend's dad worked for the city police department. So product approval probably wouldn't take long. Besides, the vehicle itself used plenty of components that were already mature products on the market. Aside from the chassis and a few parts that needed customization, everything else was readily available. All Tyler needed to do was recruit a few people, finalize the assembly process, and then push the product onto the market. If there were weaknesses to this thing, the first was safety. The second was the fire risk while charging the batteries. And that second problem was the most dangerous one. If he couldn't control the fire hazard properly, a single accident could destroy everything if the PR response failed. Still, Tyler himself had plenty of connections within the government system, and the country was aggressively promoting new energy vehicles. There were rumors that subsidies for electric motorcycles would soon be reduced, but there was also a good chance the government would give the industry one final boost before cutting them. If Tyler went ahead with this, he might actually carve out a path for himself. What exactly do you think he's trying to do? Charles thought it over carefully. Surely he isn't planning to manufacture this kind of vehicle. Butler Bennett considered it for a moment too. I met the young master today. He's extremely meticulous. I think his plan is probably similar to Miss Helena's. Use electric motorcycles as a stepping stone into the new energy vehicle industry. I see, Charles thought for a moment. Then there's no need to keep Flash Mobility alive. Prepare it for bankruptcy liquidation. If Tyler's startup really succeeds, he'll definitely need those assets. My eldest granddaughter is clearly a lost cause. So now I'm left with this youngest grandson. In that case, let's see what he's really made of. If he actually has some ability, then the Carter family may still have a decent heir after all. Charles let out a long sigh. Then he asked, do you think he'd ever take the Carter name again? Forgive me for being blunt. Butler Bennett answered without hesitation. Young Master Robert and his wife can't make that happen. Miss Wu has already been sent away. Miss Six and young Master Ethan Carter still haven't been released either. As for the other young ladies, Pink, they'd be better off staying away from young Master Tyler. Otherwise, they'll only make things worse. Thinking back to when he passed Helena earlier, and seen the disgust and hatred in Tyler's eyes, Butler Bennett couldn't help feeling. There was absolutely no chance those women could convince Tyler to return to the Carter family. If they went looking for Tyler, they'd be lucky just to come back in one piece. And even luckier if they didn't get themselves thrown behind bars. How did things end up like this? Charles's sigh was filled with helplessness. Why did this happen? Everything was it was supposed to be a winning hand. According to the future he'd planned, Robert Carter didn't need to be exceptional. He only needed to keep the family business stable. His 6 daughters could rely on the massive foundation of Sunrise Group and branch out into different industries. Ethan Carter would become the future heir. And once Ethan took control, he could use the paths his 6 older sisters had already explored to begin transforming the company once Tyler returned. His influence within the government could provide the Carter family with a stable external environment and political support. 3 generations of the family would work together. His granddaughters would scout out promising directions ahead, while Tyler provided a stable external environment, along with information about government policy. Then Ethan could boldly begin reforming the company and adjusting its direction, allowing the entire Sunrise Group to make it safely through the transition and keep pace with the country's economic transformation, moving from traditional industries into emerging sectors. But why did it turn out like this? Charles simply couldn't understand it. Everything was supposed to work. Even if Tyler came back early, that shouldn't have mattered. Ethan only needed to build a good relationship with him. I told them all that from the beginning. Tyler's position would never threaten Ethan's. I would have pushed Tyler toward a government career. So why? Where did all this hatred come from? Doesn't make any sense. Even if Tyler had flaws. Who in this world doesn't? He simply couldn't understand how Ethan, a grown man, had somehow started acting like one of those vicious schemers from a trashy TV drama, using all kinds of underhanded tricks. He couldn't understand why Robert Carter and Grace Carter were so blatantly biased toward Ethan, and even more baffling, Olivia Carter and Helena Carter had never even met Tyler before. So why did they hate him so deeply? I don't know either. Butler Bennett shook his head. But then something suddenly occurred to him. There is one thing. I'm not sure whether I should mention it. Charles's gaze sharpened. Say it. Butler Bennett spoke cautiously. Today the young master brought his friend along and picked one man from the security team you arranged, then ordered him to report directly to the young master. There was nothing unusual about his friend, but before choosing that security guard, the young master first asked for the man's exact birth date and time. Butler Bennett copied the way Tyler had counted on his fingers. The young master looked like he was doing some kind of fortune-telling. He only made his decision after finishing the calculation. And I also went to the precinct to review the mediation footage from that day. The young master did something similar there too. Also, the injuries on his body healed unusually fast. Do you think it could be? Ryan, Tyler, come on, let's have a drink. A loud shout rang out, immediately followed by a burst of cheering. Here's to Tyler and Ryan making a fortune. May the money keep rolling in every single day. Another voice quickly joined in, filled with flattery and anticipation. Everyone cheered in agreement and raised their glasses together. Inside the luxurious banquet hall on the 2nd floor of New Springs Grand Hotel, a dozen or so teenagers sat around a massive dining table. Their hair came in every color imaginable. Their makeup was loud and exaggerated, and their outfits ranged from bizarre to outrageous. They stood in stark contrast to the elegant banquet hall around them. Without the slightest concern for etiquette, they eagerly devoured dish after dish while chugging beer straight from large green bottles. They looked exactly like a bunch of country bumpkins who had just stumbled in from the sticks. Hey, Ryan, check out that girl over there. She's pretty cute. A blonde-haired guy narrowed his eyes and pointed toward a waitress not far away, his tone dripping with sleazy interest. Knock it off. Don't get any stupid ideas. A red-haired girl glared at him and cursed bluntly. We're here today to support Tyler. Don't start trouble. The teenagers spoke crudely, without the slightest trace of manners. Ryan's brows kept twitching as he watched them. Every so often, he glanced back toward Tyler, who was carefully reviewing the documents. His eyes filled with worry, guilt, and irritation all at once. These were personal information forms that had been hastily prepared for the teenagers to fill out, and they were now scattered across the table in front of Tyler. The more Tyler read, the bigger his headache became. The forms were an absolute mess, and the handwriting was so sloppy it was barely legible. After going through them carefully, he pulled out 3 that were at least somewhat presentable: Daniel Lewis, Noah Lane, and Lily Lewis. When Tyler saw the last name, Lily Lewis, his eyebrow rose slightly, and he thought to himself, could this legendary Lily archetype really have come here to experience the mortal world, and somehow ended up right in front of me? Whatever, it didn't matter. He looked more closely at the 3 people's education, family backgrounds, and personal histories. Each of them had taken an unusual path through life. Daniel Lewis was born on July 28, 1993. His education wasn't impressive, but among this group, it was still the highest. He came from a single-parent household. During his second year of high school, financial pressure forced him to drop out and enter an electronics factory, where he became an ordinary assembly line worker. Every day after work, he ate dinner at roadside food stalls. One day, a female co-worker at the factory was being harassed, and Daniel stepped in without hesitation. By coincidence, Ryan happened to pass by that day and witnessed the whole thing. Something about one tough guy recognizing another instantly clicked, and that was how the two became friends. Noah Lane was born on December 10, 1995. He was male, and his education ranked second among the 3. He had only finished middle school, but his family situation was far more tragic. Both of his parents died when he was young, and his grandparents passed away when he was 10, leaving him completely orphaned. Later, with help from the government, and by working whatever jobs he could find, he managed to survive. After middle school, he couldn't afford further education, so he went to work at a factory. He and Daniel both worked at the same electronics plant. He met Ryan through the same incident that brought Daniel and Ryan together. And since Noah and Daniel were already friends, he naturally became connected to Ryan as well. As for Lily Lewis, she was part of the younger generation, born on January 1, 2002. Her education was the lowest of the 3. She had dropped out before even finishing middle school. Her family lived in a remote rural village in the Northwest, and the reason she left school was actually to support her younger brother so he could continue studying. She worked alongside Daniel and Noah at the same factory and met them through the same incident, except she was the girl who had been harassed that day. Interesting. The corner of Tyler's mouth twitched slightly. He murmured under his breath, the 3 heroes of the electronics factory, huh? His gaze moved between the 3 of them, and he already had a plan forming in his mind. Their handwriting might not have been impressive by Tyler's standards, but compared with everyone else's wild scribbles that were practically impossible to read, theirs looked considerably neater. Daniel's handwriting was the cleanest. Noah's came second. You do! Lily's handwriting looked a little childish then, but it was still clear and easy to read. When filling out their information, those 3 had also been the most serious and careful. As for everyone else, Tyler shook his head inwardly. Their value, for what he had in mind, was basically negligible. A thought suddenly occurred to Tyler. After doing this twice before, he was already much more familiar with the process. This time, he decided to use the 3 people's Gregorian birth dates to calculate their 8 characters of birth. His fingertips moved lightly, as though he were reaching toward some invisible thread of fate, while silently reciting their dates of birth. July 28, 1993. December 10, 1995. January 1, 2002. In his mind, he began converting those ordinary calendar dates, according to the ancient principles of the I Ching, into the mysterious 8 characters of birth. Then he began divining how the 3 of them would be connected to him in the future. First came Daniel's 8 characters, slowly taking shape in Tyler's mind. Gyo year, Jiwei month, Gingshu day. He closed his eyes and pondered, his fingers unconsciously tracing one mysterious pattern after another through the air, as if communicating with the unseen energies of heaven and earth. Ryan, who kept glancing over at Tyler from time to time, noticed him doing that strange thing again. He had already seen Tyler do it once at the Carter estate, and now that he was witnessing it again, it only seemed even stranger. Though he couldn't explain why, H9, it felt as though something around Tyler was quietly shifting and flowing, making his entire presence seem distant and almost unreal. This is the second time. Ryan couldn't quite describe what he was seeing, but his instincts told him that ever since everything happened with the Carter family, his little brother had become a completely different person. The way he spoke, the way he acted, even his eyes, especially those eyes, everything about him had changed. He didn't look anything like a kid who had just gotten into college. If anything, he reminded Ryan of some of the veteran cops he knew. Could Tyler seriously have some kind of system? Or had some transmigrator possessed his body? No way, right? Tyler didn't notice Ryan's strange expression. He had already entered a state of divination. This time, he went deeper than before, and the calculation became more detailed. The Giyo year carried powerful metal energy. Its spiritual force was like a sword being drawn from its sheath. The Jiwei month carried heavy earth energy, steady and grounded, solid as a mountain. While the Gangshu day formed a cycle where metal and earth supported each other, with Gang metal seated upon Shu earth, like a treasured sword resting inside its sheath. Its edge concealed, but its power held deep within. Tyler thought, this destiny is overflowing with metal and earth, a sign of wealth and status. But hidden within that fate was also a trial. One that could only be overcome through his own intelligence and courage. Only then could he break free from his cocoon and become something greater, and enjoy a smooth road afterward. Daniel's fate contained wealth and success. But he needed a benefactor to guide him. Only then could he avoid the thorns along the way and step onto a smoother path. Not bad. I can be that benefactor for him. After confirming Daniel's fate, Tyler turned his attention to Noah. His 8 characters were Yihai year, Wuzi month, Gongchen day. Tyler's brows drew together slightly. Complicated look flashed through his eyes. The Yihai year carried water and wood nourishing one another. Yi wood was flexible and resilient, while high water was vast and deep. Water and wood intertwined, overflowing with vitality, while the Wuzi month mixed water and earth. Wu earth was heavy and solid, while Zai water was agile and restless. Water and earth opposed and supported one another, creating constant rises and falls. The Gingchen day brought metal and earth together. Ging metal was firm and unyielding, while Chen earth was warm and nourishing. Metal and earth harmonized, stable as solid rock. This destiny, its future, is difficult to predict. Tyler couldn't help marveling inwardly. Without more detailed information about the exact birth hour, he could only make a broad judgment, but this looked like the fate of a heavenly solitary star. An extraordinarily rare destiny, according to his calculations. Noah was destined to live a lonely and difficult life. If he wanted to break free from that fate, he would have to stay beside someone protected by immense fortune and borrow that person's powerful luck. Only then could the solitary curse be suppressed, and his fate finally begin to change. In that case, I'll just keep Noah by my side. After all, I was a transmigrator, and the true heir in one of those switched-at-birth rich family stories. Or, the true heir usually suffered horribly in the first timeline, but once the second run began, everything always went his way. Whatever he tried, he succeeded. Within a year, he could casually build a fortune worth tens of billions, and mingle with the richest and most powerful people in the country, or even the world. If someone like that didn't have overwhelming luck, then who did? And on top of that, I was a transmigrator. The luck of a transmigrator combined with the luck of the true heir. If that still didn't count as overwhelming fortune, then I had no idea what would. So from now on, Noah could simply stay by my side. Bach, Af. Last came Lily. Tyler's gaze settled on Lily Lewis as he began calculating her 8 characters. Jinsi year, Gingzi month, Jicho day. Suddenly, a strange sensation stirred in my chest, as though I had felt some inexplicable tremor deep inside. Something about this didn't feel right. The Shinsi year carried both metal and fire. Tin metal was sharp and piercing, while sea fire burned fiercely. Metal and fire intertwined, forging something extraordinary. The Gingzi month brought metal and water together. Ging metal was cold and pure, while Z water was clear and crystalline. Metal and water blended into a chilling harmony, agile and ethereal. The Jishu day was dominated by earth. Ji earth was fertile and nurturing, while True Earth was cold and still. Its earth energy was dense and powerful, stable as a mountain. I carefully continued the calculation, and waves of shock surged through my heart. This girl's fate also carried signs of wealth and status, but she was destined to go through a passionate and devastating ordeal, one intense enough to burn down everything around her, including the lives of those closest to her. Only after surviving it could she finally reach a good ending. More importantly, that ordeal seemed to involve me somehow. So the legendary Lily really was here to undergo her romantic tribulation with me? I drew a deep breath. No, I had to calculate it. I absolutely had to find out what this romantic trial was, and exactly what role I would play in her future. Was I supposed to be the villain or the one who saved her? I decided to go all in, pouring every bit of spiritual energy and mental strength in my body into divining the beginning and end of this ordeal. I closed my eyes and focused. My fingertips moved lightly, as though they could touch the invisible secrets of fate itself. I used the 8 trigrams of the I Ching, taking Qian and Kun as the foundation, Jun and Shun as the moving forces, Han and Li as the core, with Jin and Dewey as support. Then I merged Lily's 8 characters into the formation, trying to uncover even the slightest clue about her romantic ordeal. Ryan, who had been watching me the whole time, suddenly narrowed his eyes. He seemed to notice that on my right wrist, a jade bracelet was faintly glowing. If he remembered correctly, his little brother had never worn anything like that before. And why had he never noticed it until now? Could it be Ryan suddenly remembered something his dad had once told him long ago? That some unsolved cases weren't impossible to crack. They simply couldn't be prosecuted even after the truth was uncovered. Could this be? I didn't notice Ryan staring at me. I was still calculating, silently reciting the trigrams of the I Ching. Qian represents heaven. Kun represents earth. Zhen represents thunder. Shun represents wind. Kan represents water. Li represents fire. Jin represents mountain. And Dewey represents lake. My fingers traced one complicated pattern after another through the air, as though communicating with the spiritual energy between heaven and earth. But this romantic ordeal seemed to be hidden beneath a mysterious veil of fog. No matter how hard I tried, I still couldn't make out the specific details. After several rounds of calculation produced nothing. I could only curse inwardly. This legendary Lily had really brought her romantic tribulation straight to me. Everyone. I stood up, intending to say something. But suddenly, my vision went completely black, and then I knew nothing at all. At the military hospital, a luxurious Rolls-Royce slowly entered the underground parking garage, before it had even come to a complete stop. The rear door was flung open. An elderly man sprang out with surprising agility, landing firmly on his feet, then immediately taking long strides. As he hurried toward the elevator, the old man was Charles Carter. Just moments earlier, he had still been at his villa listening to Butler Bennett's report about everything concerning Tyler, and wondering what excuse he could use to visit the grandson who wanted nothing to do with the Carter family. Unexpectedly, an excuse had arrived on its own. Butler Bennett had received a phone call, and the identity of the caller had surprised him. It was Ryan, Tyler's friend, and currently his personal driver. Butler Bennett already knew quite a bit about him. After taking charge of matters involving the Carter family, he had thoroughly investigated everyone around Tyler, and Ryan was naturally no exception. He knew that the young man had been born into a police family, yet had chosen not to follow in his dad's footsteps, instead taking a completely different path, running around with street punks and delinquents. He might have seemed like someone throwing his life away, but Ryan was loyal and kept his word. When his dad asked him to look after Tyler, he devoted himself completely to it, without a single complaint, even if some of his methods were occasionally less than respectable. Thinking about it carefully, Ryan wasn't actually a bad kid. Maybe family pressure had simply pushed him into rebellion, and those gangster movies had influenced him too much. That was why, during their meeting this time, Butler Bennett had seized the opportunity to quietly chat with Ryan for a few moments and exchange phone numbers with him. Butler Bennett was a trusted retainer of the Carter family. If Tyler truly rose to greatness one day, then the people around him, Dow, especially Ryan, would inevitably become members of his inner circle. Judging from their relationship so far, The bond between the two of them was beginning to resemble the relationship between Butler Bennett and Charles. Still, they were children of a new generation, and were ultimately different from them. Perhaps they could forge a path completely different from the one Butler Bennett and Charles had taken, and build an entirely different kind of relationship. At that thought, Butler Bennett glanced down at the silver phone in his hand, then looked toward Charles, who was already striding away and couldn't help smiling to himself. The old man's health really was impressive. Indeed, Charles's life had gone remarkably smoothly when he inherited the company from his own father. The country was entering a period of rapid growth after economic reforms. Sunrise Group had taken off like a ship with the wind at its back. Charles himself had also enjoyed excellent health and successfully passed control of the company to his son, Robert Carter. He normally paid close attention to maintaining his health and exercising, although he often walked with a cane and deliberately moved at a slow, measured pace. Most of it was just an act. Once a man reached his age, he had to look like the dignified elder and patriarch of the family. Otherwise, Charles would never bother shuffling around with a cane every day. The moment he heard that Tyler had fainted, he couldn't sit still anymore. "Bennett, what are you dawdling around for?" Charles was already almost at the elevator when he realized Butler Bennett hadn't caught up yet, so he turned around and urged him on. "Hurry up, I'm coming." Butler Bennett was getting old too, so naturally his legs weren't as quick as Charles's. He hurried his pace and finally caught up, then entered the elevator with Charles and headed for the third-floor ward. When the two arrived, my adoptive parents, George Miller and Linda Miller, were already waiting there. Linda was silently wiping away tears as she cried. George's face was grim, but his eyes were filled with deep concern. When they saw Charles arrive with Butler Bennett, their expressions stiffened slightly, but neither of them said much. After everything Robert Carter and his family had done, anyone would have been angry. So it was perfectly understandable that George and Linda resented the Carter family under the circumstances. Still, they were reasonable and well-mannered people. They wouldn't blame an elder for the mistakes of his children and grandchildren. Besides, Charles himself had personally visited their home that day and waited outside until they returned. That alone showed a certain amount of sincerity and proved that the Carter family did care about me. What exactly happened? Charles stepped forward, his gaze landing on Ryan. "Kid," Bennett told me, "you two were perfectly fine when you left the estate, weren't you?" The third generation of the Carter family could barely maintain what they already had, and Ethan Carter, who had once carried all Charles's hopes among the fourth generation, now looked like a completely hopeless case. He had finally seen a glimmer of hope in Tyler, in ATI, and Charles had no intention of watching something happen to him now. How the hell would we know? George was already irritated, so he answered Ryan's question for him with obvious sarcasm. "He was perfectly fine when he left your family's estate. So how can you blame the kid? I heard he suddenly collapsed while they were eating. The doctors still haven't figured out exactly what's wrong. They said it might be exhaustion. But he's young and strong. How could he suddenly end up like this? Maybe there's something wrong with the feng shui at your Carter estate. Maybe your family picked up something unclean. Exhaustion?" Butler Bennett frowned. He had been closely following Tyler's activities lately and knew the young man had been extremely busy. But considering his age and his current workload, it didn't seem likely that he'd collapsed from overwork. "Ryan," Butler Bennett suddenly thought of something. He walked over to Ryan and asked, "Did the young master do anything strange along the way?" "Don't rush. Think carefully. What happened from the moment you left the estate until he was admitted here? Anything strange?" Ryan found the question a little odd, but he still answered, "My little brother fell asleep as soon as he got in the car after leaving the estate. So I found somewhere to pull over and let him rest for a while. After he woke up, we went to meet one of my friends and had dinner together." "Wait, how did I forget about that?" Ryan suddenly slapped his forehead, as if something had just come back to him. "Now that you mention it, I really did notice something. During dinner, Tyler didn't sit at the table with us. He was looking through the forms my friends had filled out. Then all of a sudden, he started doing this." Ryan imitated Tyler's movements, closing his eyes and gesturing with his hands. It wasn't exactly the same, and plenty of the movements were completely made up, but he still managed to recreate the general idea. I also heard him quietly muttering something. Something about Gingzi month, metal and water, and a bunch of other stuff. Then something about Qian being heaven or whatever. At first, I had only been reciting everything silently. But when I started calculating Lily's fate, and realized it somehow involved me, yet I still couldn't see the answer, I grew impatient, and as I kept calculating, a few words occasionally slipped out. Ryan had pretty good hearing, so he'd managed to catch a little of it, though even if I had shouted the entire thing, he probably still wouldn't have understood much. Butler Bennett and Charles were both startled. They exchanged a glance, and suddenly looked as though everything had clicked into place. Mr. Carter. Linda noticed the change in their expressions, and realized they seemed to have figured something out. She wiped the tears from her face, and forced herself to calm down, before asking anxiously, "Have you two figured out what's wrong?" "It's not exactly that something's wrong," Butler Bennett answered on Charles's behalf. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, has the young master ever had contact with any Taoist priests, especially anyone skilled in divination? Or has he ever studied fortune-telling? Or anything similar himself?" No. Linda shook her head. She had never seen Tyler interact with anyone like that, nor had she ever seen him study such things. "Wait," George suddenly disagreed. "Linda, did you forget? His teacher told us years ago that he kept dreaming about an old man teaching him lessons, showing him how to practice this and learn that." Linda also found it strange, but she remembered what had happened back then. Didn't they say it was because we were putting too much pressure on him? That he couldn't handle it and started hallucinating. They could no longer remember the exact date. But it seemed to have happened during his final year of middle school, when Tyler had been preparing for his high school entrance exams, and they really had put quite a lot of pressure on him back then. The moment Charles heard that, his eyes widened. "My Tyler actually had an opportunity like that? What are you talking about?" Linda was completely confused. "It's like this," Butler Bennett quickly explained. "Mrs. Carter, you and Mr. Carter probably know that the eldest member of the Carter family is a returned overseas Chinese, and Mr. Carter himself also studied abroad. The family has always maintained ties with overseas Chinese communities, and overseas Chinese, especially first-generation immigrants, often view these things differently from people back home, particularly when it comes to matters like this. People here tend to be selectively scientific. If something predicts good luck, they call it a blessing from the gods. If it predicts bad luck, they dismiss it as superstition. Didn't he specifically ask for that security guard's birthday today? Charles finally grew impatient with Butler Bennett's long explanation and directly asked Ryan when he had everyone fill out those forms. Didn't he insist that they include their birth dates? And that the dates had to be accurate, preferably down to the exact hour and minute? Ryan froze for a moment, then quickly nodded. "That's fortune-telling through divination." Charles gave the answer directly. "Plenty of people here believe in it too. They just tend to believe the good predictions and dismiss the bad ones as feudal superstition. People overseas take this kind of thing much more seriously. Even I do. In the past, whenever I faced a major decision I couldn't make, I'd invite a master to calculate it for me, then make my decision afterward." Tyler's movements were obviously those of someone performing divination, Butler Bennett continued, judging from the bracelet and the fragments Ryan just overheard. He was probably using birth dates and 8 characters to calculate people's destinies and futures. So, instruction or a fist, the young master has studied divination and apparently reached a respectable level. But, Charles fell silent for a moment before speaking. Fortune-telling and divination always come with a price. The more significant the thing you calculate, the greater the price. Tyler probably became overconfident because he'd learned the technique and started recklessly calculating other people's destinies and futures. He failed to control how far he went and suffered a backlash. Still, using someone's 8 characters to calculate their general destiny or take a glimpse at their future isn't usually anything serious, Charles added. Normally, it wouldn't cause much trouble. Even calculating several people in one day should be fine. Unless one of those people has an extremely unusual fate. The moment he said that, Charles's expression suddenly froze, then completely collapsed. Under everyone's stunned gaze, he suddenly slapped himself hard across the face several times. "Sir, don't do that." Butler Bennett immediately realized something was wrong. and hurriedly grabbed Charles, pulling him aside. So that's what happened. So that's how my Carter family was destined to be harmed. Ah ha ha ha, both. So the root of everything was me. Charles looked as if he'd lost his mind. Tears streamed down his aged face. As he muttered words no one else understood, while repeatedly striking himself. Sir, everyone's watching. Butler Bennett was confused too. But he didn't know what else to say. What happened to you? What are you talking about? No one could understand the bitterness tormenting the old patriarch. Years ago, when Grace gave birth to her 5th daughter, Charles had grown anxious and secretly traveled to Mount Longhu to visit an elderly Taoist priest skilled in divination whom he often consulted, and asked him to cast a hexagram. He simply wanted to know whether he would ever have a grandson, and what kind of abilities that grandson might possess. Taoist laid out 3 copper coins and performed the divination for him. The hexagram showed that he would indeed have a grandson, and that the boy would be extraordinary, possessing an exceptionally rare destiny, and carrying tremendous fortune. However, the boy's connection with the Carter family would have to be handled carefully. Otherwise, he might bring harm upon the family itself. The exact meaning had been mysterious and difficult to predict. Later, when Ethan Carter appeared, Charles assumed this grandson, who had grown up outside the family, would have no attachment to them, and would return only to fight over the inheritance. He thought that was what the old Taoist had meant by harming the Carter family. Such things weren't uncommon among wealthy families, and had led to plenty of scandals and tragedies. So Charles had assumed that was how the prophecy would come true. But now he realized that wasn't it at all. My head hurt so badly it felt like my skull had been stuffed full of angry hornets. Sharp pain exploded through every nerve ending. I clenched my back teeth. My hospital gown, soaked through with cold sweat, clung to my back. A muffled groan escaped my throat. "Tyler, wake up!" A young man's voice with a northeastern accent cut through the haze, like someone had slammed a palm directly against my eardrum. "Nurse, where's the nurse?" "Tyler." A woman's gentle voice trembled with sobs. Cold fingers gently wrapped around the back of my hand. "Mom's right here. Open your eyes and look at me." "Young master." Butler Bennett's aged voice was trembling too. "Doctor, nurse." "Doctor, my precious grandson." The heavy thud of a wooden cane struck the floor, as Charles shouted through tears, setting off an alarm on the heart monitor. "If you people can't save him, I'll tear this hospital down and turn it into a doghouse." Calm down. This is a military hospital. Another man's deep voice tried to reason with him. "Please stop making things harder for everyone. You're getting everybody worked up before I could even recover from the sudden wave of agony." All kinds of voices were already flooding into my ears. Some sounded shocked. Some were filled with concern, and others were choked with anxious sobs. "Where am I?" I wondered in confusion. After quite a while, I finally managed to force open my eyelids, which felt as heavy as lead. The first thing I saw was an unfamiliar white ceiling. The sharp smell of disinfectant hung in the air. A hospital. My heart stirred. That pungent smell hit me full force, and instantly cleared my head. I turned and looked at the people gathered around my bed, and warmth spread through my chest. This was what friends were. This was what family felt like. In my previous life, I'd had friends and family too, but my family situation had been complicated, to say the least, and I hadn't had many friends. It wasn't until I entered the police academy, and later joined the force, that I finally made more friends, and learned what genuine concern and care felt like. Even so, that feeling was still different from having a real family beside me. "I'm fine." I struggled to sit up. My voice sounded weak. "I'm just a little tired." Linda looked at me with concern. She hesitated for a moment, then finally asked, "Tyler, did you perform divination for several people today?" I froze. I hadn't expected my adoptive mom to know about that. My gaze swept across everyone in the room, and I found the whole thing strange. That shouldn't have been possible. The old Taoist had once told me that spiritual energy was almost non-existent in this era. And after the campaigns against the Four Olds following the founding of the country, practices like divination, whether real or fake, had been swept aside across the board. Even after the economic reforms began, restrictions had loosened somewhat, but things still hadn't been completely opened up. There weren't many fortune tellers in the country today with genuine skill or real ability. Most only understood the surface-level basics and relied on vague psychological tricks to fool people. Even if someone could recognize that I was performing divination, they still shouldn't have known what I was calculating. I was confused, so I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I tried to figure out how to explain it away. But every change in my expression was clearly visible to everyone around me. Kid, I've met more than a few genuinely capable fortune tellers. Charles finally spoke. There was still some irritation on his face, but even more concern. He looked exactly like an elder who was truly worried about his grandson. Both angry and anxious, he said. I may never have studied this stuff myself, but I've seen enough of it to know roughly how it works. Didn't the master who taught you tell you about the taboos and precautions involved in divination? How could you just mess around with it like this? I froze again and couldn't help thinking back to the old Taoist in my dreams. He really had talked about divination before. As I carefully searched my memory, his words seemed to echo beside my ears once again. The art of divination is a secret method that communicates with heaven and earth and peers into the hidden workings of fate. It uses spiritual energy as its foundation, connecting with heaven and earth to deduce what cannot normally be known. Its demand for spiritual energy is not especially severe. Even the faintest trace is sufficient as long as it can connect with heaven and earth. Yet, although the requirement for spiritual energy is not high, this art still seeks to peer into the secrets of fate and glimpse what lies ahead. So, it demands extraordinary natural aptitude from the practitioner. Furthermore, every matter being divined is different, and the things required, as well as the price paid, will vary accordingly. If one forces a divination without proper preparation, the lighter consequence is damage to one's own vitality and fortune. The worst may end in death and the destruction of one's path. For the secrets of heaven are profound and cannot be casually led by ordinary will. The path of divination is not something one may recklessly practice. Therefore, those who walk this path must exercise extreme caution, judge the circumstances carefully, and make thorough preparations. Only then may they enter the mysteries of divination and attempt to glimpse the hidden workings of fate. The difficulty of this art does not lie only in spiritual energy, but also in one's aptitude and the completeness of one's preparation. The moment I remembered that, cold sweat broke out across my body. Whatever emotional entanglement awaited Lily and me in the future, and whatever that ordeal involved, it had to be extremely difficult to calculate, and something with enormous consequences. Yet today, I tried to force the divination without any preparation. I had probably damaged my own fortune and injured myself in the process. Fortunately, nothing serious had happened. Otherwise, I really wouldn't have known how to clean up the mess. Charles snorted. You brat! Now you know enough to be scared? Then he turned toward Butler Bennett. Bennett, prepare some nourishing supplements. This kid acted recklessly. His body must be drained and weak right now. Make sure he spends the next few days recovering properly. I could hear the concern in Charles's voice, and I could see it too. My biological grandfather genuinely cared about me. The feeling left me a little conflicted, because everything Robert Carter and his family had done had left me biased against the Carter family as a whole, but I also knew better than to blame everyone for the actions of a few. Out of all the Carter family members I'd met, Charles was easily the most reasonable one. Besides, his concern was genuine, and he really had been spending money and giving me things to make up for the past and show that he cared. Thank you, Grandpa. It still felt a little awkward, but I thanked him sincerely. The moment Charles heard me call him that, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Much of the anger disappeared from his face, replaced by a smile and genuine concern. He thought for a moment and seemed to hesitate before finally saying, Tyler, there's something, Grandpa. The old man stumbled awkwardly over his words, and his hesitation made me curious. When Charles saw the confusion on my face, he gritted his teeth and continued. It's about what happened during the mediation at the precinct. Did you calculate something back then? Could you tell Grandpa what it was? Then he hurriedly added, Of course. I'm not trying to force you to say anything. If you don't want to tell me, then forget I asked. I paused, but then I quickly understood. There had been surveillance cameras in the mediation room. Charles knew about divination and had met fortune tellers before. so he could probably recognize what I'd been doing. All he had to do was watch the footage. And he'd know I'd been performing some kind of divination. After thinking it over, I said, I won't bother talking about Victoria Carter and Ethan Carter. There's nothing strange about them. Children naturally compete with each other and want more attention from their parents, so they reject other children, especially someone new. That means their hostility toward me and their desire to drive me away forever was understandable. But Mr. Carter and Mrs. Carter behaved differently, and that's what I found strange. I continued. Their behavior didn't make sense under normal circumstances. That's why I asked back then whether someone had frightened or threatened them. The moment Charles heard that, his expression instantly hardened, but he didn't interrupt, and simply waited for me to continue. Then I noticed something was wrong with Ethan's expression. I explained truthfully. So I performed a quick divination on that kid. Charles's expression darkened even further, until it looked almost terrifying. Yes, I had no intention of hiding it, since the old man already knew about divination. He was probably capable of noticing that something about Robert Carter and his family was abnormal, even if I said nothing. Judging from how much Charles believed in this kind of thing, he might investigate it himself sooner or later, so I might as well tell him first. I didn't know whether it would earn me any goodwill, but it was still better than bringing it up only after everything came to light. I silently weighed my options, then continued aloud. But my skill is still shallow, so the result may not be accurate. You're still making excuses for that little bastard. Charles struggled to suppress his anger and glared at me. No, I'm just being realistic. I shook my head. I had absolutely no intention of defending Ethan. First, my cultivation in divination is limited. Second, I performed the calculation without any proper basis that day. The signs in the hexagram were unclear, so the result was uncertain. I explained as I analyzed it. Based on what I calculated, Ethan Carter is connected to the curse. But that doesn't necessarily mean he was the one who placed it. He could have done it himself, or he could have known about it and kept quiet, or even conspired with someone else. Of course, there's also a chance someone was using him. As for Mr. and Mrs. Carter, their prejudice against me and the way they mistreated me wasn't entirely caused by the curse either. I continued. A large part of it came from their own personalities and choices. As for exactly how the curse was placed, what kind of curse it was, or how many people it affected, I have no way of knowing. Well, I sighed. Divination is complicated, at least for someone who hasn't become an immortal. It's impossible to just calculate everything out of thin air. Even though I hadn't revealed much, Charles's expression was changing faster than a color wheel. His face shifted again and again, and only after a long while did he finally calm down. He drew a deep breath. Someone is trying to destroy the Carter family, more or less. I nodded, judging by the method. Then I shook my head. Honestly, it reminded me of pouring boiling water onto someone else's money tree. Simple, crude, and overflowing with superstition. But in this world, I really didn't dare dismiss things like that, because methods like these were genuinely vicious and underhanded, and they really could kill someone. Still, personally, I don't think Ethan was the one who placed the curse. I added. Why? Charles asked, his brows furrowing. Because he doesn't have the guts or the brains for it, I explained. My master told me about secret techniques like this. If we're talking about a goo curse involving poisonous insects, then both raising the goo and placing it take a toll on the person doing it. The cultivation process can take anywhere from a year or two to several decades. Goo insects are useful and extremely difficult to detect, but if you didn't raise one yourself, it's almost impossible to control. And if you ask someone else to place the goo for you, you're basically putting your own fate in that person's hands. Other curses aren't as easy as television makes them look either. You can't just get someone's hair and a few personal items and call it done. I thought back to what the old Taoist had taught me. Some rituals require setting up an altar and performing ceremonies, and certain materials have to be supplied continuously. Not only are they incredibly expensive, but some of the things required aren't something Ethan would dare obtain. If someone wanted to target a family like the Carter family, with such deep accumulated fortune, they'd need specific human skin, bones, and blood. I looked at Charles and said with a hint of mockery, he doesn't have the nerve. Ethan could never go that far. I stated it with absolute certainty. If Ethan really had that kind of intelligence and that kind of courage, he wouldn't need to hide behind other people and play these petty manipulative games. Charles fell silent for a while, as though digesting what I'd said, then slowly nodded and sighed again. I shook my head. That kid, if you really want to investigate this, Ethan is the key to breaking the case open, even if he didn't do it himself. He definitely knows something. At the exit of the military hospital's underground garage, a Rolls-Royce slowly pulled out like an elegant beast. Gliding silently beneath the morning light, Charles sat in the spacious back seat, his eyes closed, as though sinking into a deep ocean, searching for even the slightest bit of peace. Butler Bennett occasionally glanced at Charles through the rear-view mirror. The old man's usually steady, rock-like face now carried a barely noticeable ripple of emotion. With a soft sigh, he seemed to have 1,000 things he wanted to say, yet every word felt lodged in his throat, and he didn't know where to begin. "Are you trying to plead for that little bastard?" Charles sighed softly, as though he'd already seen through Butler Bennett's thoughts. There was a trace of exhaustion in his voice. Butler Bennett sighed too, and slowly said, "Young Master Ethan may have been deceived. Maybe that's why he did all of this." Deceived? Charles opened his eyes. His gaze passed through the car window, watching the city streets rush past, without saying another word. Deep down, he regretted that he'd once believed Ethan was destined for greatness, and had overlooked his smaller mistakes. After all, no one was perfect. Guys, everyone made mistakes, thinking back on Ethan's past. His grades had always ranked near the top of his class. He was a starting player on the basketball team, and he played the piano well. He wasn't world-class, but among amateurs, he was certainly outstanding. He was humble and polite toward others, and deeply loved by his family and elders. He said his dream was to become a doctor, to heal the sick and save lives, and help take care of his family's health. But now, a strange chill rose inside Charles, as he suddenly realized that everything Ethan had done seemed almost too deliberate. He wasn't like an ordinary child, who simply tried to show his best side in front of his elders, in hopes of receiving praise and approval. Instead, he deliberately showed them exactly what they wanted to see. Even if he disliked something, he would still do it, as long as he could display it in front of the elders. By comparison, Tyler had never been especially outstanding in the past, but he had still been a fairly well-behaved kid. His grades were above average, and he liked martial arts and weapons. Though his actual skills were mediocre, he had taught himself swordsmanship and boxing. But they were mostly flashy moves, good enough for show, but useless in a real fight. His adoptive parents had also arranged piano lessons for him, and his progress had been neither impressive nor terrible. He had barely reached an advanced amateur level, roughly on par with Ethan. But when it came to dealing with people, Tyler had been far worse. His teachers described him as quiet and somewhat dull, completely clueless about social etiquette and human relationships, and often lost in thought. Still, by comparison, Ethan had undoubtedly seemed more impressive and more promising as an heir. But after everything that happened today, Charles's opinion of Ethan had completely changed. He finally realized that Ethan's behavior had always been carefully calculated. He was constantly studying what other people liked, then shaping himself around those preferences. There was nothing inherently wrong with that. Appealing to people's preferences was a basic skill every businessman needed. Even smiling politely at an enemy, while secretly plotting against them, was understandable. Charles himself had done the same thing. But the problem was, Ethan had actually used those same tactics against his own family. The kind of heir Charles wanted should be open and sincere with family, united and loyal on the inside, flexible on the outside, knowing exactly how far to go, while still being ruthless when necessary. Ethan, however, had done the exact opposite. Now that Charles knew the truth, when he looked at Tyler again, everything seemed completely different. As a wealthy man, Charles frequently interacted with people from those circles, and he knew that receiving teachings through dreams was real. Tyler wasn't the only example. Charles personally knew another one, a celestial master from Mount Longhu, who was one of his closest friends. When that man had been a child, his own master had entered his dreams to teach him, passing down many mystical techniques and secret arts. Disciples like that were often true direct disciples of their sex, sometimes even closer than biological sons. Because teachings passed through dreams could include secret techniques known only to the master or his direct lineage, as well as many things that even insiders in those circles knew little about. Looking at it that way, his biological grandson had managed, despite heavy schoolwork and extracurricular classes, to study all these mysterious arts while still maintaining his academic performance and keeping up with his other lessons. That was already extremely impressive. He wasn't inferior to Ethan at all. If anything, he might have been even better. Charles let out a long sigh, a helpless bitterness rising inside him. Even a tiger wouldn't eat its own cubs. He sighed once more, and in the end, his heart softened. Finally, he spoke slowly. Get him out. As for what happened this time, fortunately, it didn't cause too much damage. But the follow-up needs to be handled properly. I warned that child long ago. Consider this a lesson for him. As for Madison, cut off her allowance starting today, and notify everyone. No one is to give her a single cent of spending money. She'll get only 2,000 yuan a month for living expenses. Transfer her from elite private high school to number 6 high school. Tell her she can either live on campus or take the bus to and from school herself. Sir, perhaps, Butler Bennett wanted to persuade him. After all, number 6 high school was some distance from the Carter family estate in Binhai. It wasn't terribly far, but the bus ride still took about 30 minutes. Charles scoffed. These kids have all been spoiled rotten. One throws a 5 million yuan check at someone. Another talks about 10 million like it's pocket change. Do they really think the Carter family's money grows on trees? Just look at the last 2 days. Do you know how much money this old man has spent cleaning up the messes caused by their mouths? We got incredibly lucky this time. Thank God Tyler is actually my biological grandson and knows where to draw the line. If they'd done this to someone else, who knows what that person would have done? Demanding outrageous compensation without even thinking. Idiots. Absolute idiots. Charles made no attempt to hide his anger. The family poured so many resources into them, teaching them manners and giving them the best education. How did we end up raising fools like this? When you cut off her allowance, tell that idiot, since she loves throwing around the number 10 million, then after she graduates from college, I'll give her 5 million yuan as startup capital. If she can turn that 5 million into 10 million, then in the future, she can inherit a portion of the shares I personally hold. If she can't, then when I'm gone, the only thing she'll receive from me will be a dowry worth 10 million yuan. Of course, if she wants to take it early, she can. But make one thing absolutely clear to her. Once that 5 million is gone, the family won't give her another cent. And tell her this too. If she doesn't take the money early, her allowance will be restored after college. But if she takes it early until she earns 10 million, she'll live on nothing but 2,000 yuan a month. As for that bastard Ethan Carter, Charles clenched his teeth. A cold gleam flashed through his eyes. Once he's released, lock him inside the Carter Ancestral Hall. Confiscate his phone and computer, and don't let him touch either one. I want someone watching everything he does, even when he eats or sleeps. He's not allowed to go anywhere. Have someone monitor him 24 hours a day. And remember, don't use anyone he knows. Choose the guards randomly. Rotate them in shifts. No shift should last longer than 2 hours. Then arrange a plane for me. I'm going to Mount Longhu myself. Charles decisively laid out how the family would handle everything. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Ryan had already gone home. He had stayed up all night and was completely exhausted. Although he still had plenty of questions, he wasn't sure whether he should ask them. After my adoptive parents urged him to rest, he finally went home. Now, inside the private hospital room, only my adoptive parents and I remained. Tyler. Linda peeled an apple and held it out to me. She looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't quite bring herself to. It's about your divination. I looked at Linda and George, seeing the expectation in their eyes, along with their embarrassment at asking, and immediately understood. Do you have the person's exact birth information? I asked. We only know the Gregorian date, George quickly answered. Tyler, if your body isn't up to it, then you don't have to. I waved him off and smiled. What happened before was because I forced a difficult calculation. Just locating someone won't be a problem. Really? Linda immediately lit up with joy, but she still sounded worried as she said, "They were born on February 28, 1998 at 4:03 p.m. If it's too difficult, then forget it. And their name is the same as yours." I took the apple Linda handed me and gently set it aside. My attention had already locked onto that crucial Gregorian date, February 28, 1998. Halfway through the Shen hour, I instantly converted it into the 8 characters of birth and murmured, Wu Yen year, Jiayin month, Bing Wu day, Bing Shen hour. Those 8 characters were like a secret cipher written by heaven itself, concealing the hidden trajectory of that person's fate. I closed my eyes and focused, drawing in a deep breath until my mind became completely still. My hands formed a divination seal, as though connecting with the mysterious forces between heaven and earth. The 5 elements and 8 trigrams slowly unfolded within my mind, while the verses of the I Ching surfaced silently in my thoughts. I first examined the balance within the 8 characters, and sensed the rhythm of earth and wood nourishing one another. This suggested that the person possessed a will as tough as iron, along with extraordinary resilience and vitality. The Jiayin month was rich with wood energy, indicating an energetic personality and a fierce drive to move forward, while the Bing Wu day burned with overwhelming fire, symbolizing a passionate nature and an unyielding ambition, while the Bing Shen hour brought fire and metal into conflict, suggesting that their life would be filled with countless dangers and hardships. They're alive, and apparently doing pretty well. Relief flashed through my mind, judging from the signs. They had probably learned something somewhere, and received help from someone. Their fortune burned fiercely like fire. Impressive. Seriously impressive. I couldn't help marveling inwardly. Then I pushed the calculation deeper, merging the 8 characters with the 5 elements and 8 trigrams. One hexagram after another appeared within the sea of my consciousness. The Qian hexagram revealed strength, integrity, and balance, showing that this person's convictions were exceptionally firm, and their determination was solid as stone. The Kun hexagram represented gentleness and tolerance, suggesting a broad heart and deep emotions. The Zhen hexagram carried the force of thunder in motion, revealing tremendous initiative and the courage to open new paths, while the Sun hexagram moved like the wind, showing flexibility and adaptability, the ability to adjust no matter how circumstances changed. Deep within the hexagrams, I also detected Kan and Li intertwined. Kan represented water and danger lurking everywhere, while Li represented fire and blazing passion. With those 2 hexagrams intertwined, this person's life was destined to rise and fall dramatically. Yet, it was precisely those hardships that would forge an even stronger mind and a more mature personality. As the divination went deeper, I gradually began to see the person's overall fortune more clearly. Their blessings ran deep, and throughout life they would encounter many benefactors, along with countless opportunities. However, their destiny was far from easy, and trials would follow one after another. Those hardships would test their iron will, but they were also necessary for growth. I combined their destiny with the 5 elements and 8 trigrams, and examined the interactions of yin and yang, carefully calculating their future and when they might return. The hexagram showed that the person was still alive and would return within a few months. Their fate carried fortune and disaster side by side. There would be great blessings, but also serious trials. At the very end of the divination, I discovered that this person seemed somehow connected to the Carter family. Their destinies appeared linked by invisible threads, making conflict and entanglement unavoidable. That gave me another headache. Why was the Carter family involved again? Was it because of me? After thinking about it for a moment, I finally spoke. The hexagram is clear. This person has survived danger and hardship. Earth and wood nourish each other. Jiayin marks the month. Vitality and ambition burn beneath the Bingwu sun. Passion runs deep within the Bingshan hour. Yet the road of life is filled with danger. Qian brings strength and integrity, with conviction and determination. Kun brings gentleness, with a broad heart and deep emotion. Zen moves like thunder, forever opening new paths ahead. Shun follows like the wind, adapting safely through every change. Khan and Lee intertwine, bringing waves of hardship between cold water and blazing fire. Yet those trials will forge greatness, and deep fortune will bring powerful benefactors, though hardships will come one after another. They are trials that must be endured in order to grow. The time of their return is drawing near. Within a few months, fortune and misfortune will arrive together, intertwined. Their fate is also entangled with the Carter family through conflict and unresolved ties. To understand the root of it, you'd have to look at interests, temperament, and personal choices. After hearing everything I said, my adoptive parents, neither of whom had studied the humanities, were completely lost. So I simplified it for them. They're alive, and they're doing pretty well. They've had help from someone, and they've learned quite a few things. They'll come back and reunite with you within the next few months. There was just one thing I couldn't understand. Why did calculating this person's future give me a feeling so similar to the one I'd gotten from Lily? That was seriously strange. Wasn't the missing child supposed to be a son? After enjoying 2 peaceful days, I threw myself back into my busy schedule. I sat in the spacious back seat of an Audi A6, flipping through my schedule and 2 lease agreements, feeling incredibly pleased. I was in an especially good mood today because, as of now, the first prototype had been completed successfully. The Engineering Institute had sent good news. The design department and engineering team had already discussed everything and finalized both the assembly process and the vehicle testing standards. The government's product inspection and approval procedures were also progressing smoothly. Once the certification and related paperwork came through, we could officially start selling. Everything was expected to be finished next week, around June 24. As for the business side, I'd been putting in plenty of work there too. Across Jinghai City's 12 districts, through a mix of leasing and outright purchases, I'd secured 24 storefronts. According to my plan, most of those stores would be like the first one, small storefronts, with simple decoration and various electric motorcycles packed inside. All they needed was one manager, and a few employees to run them. But there were exceptions. In the old district and the high-tech district, I'd leased 2 much larger locations to serve as the main stores on the east and west sides of Jinghai City. Each location covered 2,000 square meters, with showroom space, repair and maintenance facilities, and full warehouse capacity. The reason they were so complete was because both had originally been Zodi 4S dealerships. As for the Zodi brand, in another 2 years, it would disappear into history completely. So naturally, both dealerships were going to change hands. Originally, there was no way those locations would have ended up with me. But then that ridiculous incident happened, and Charles had someone secure both properties before handing them over to me. At the same time, I really did plan to use electric motorcycles as a stepping stone into the auto industry. So having those 2 dealerships was actually a great fit for my plans. I agreed without hesitation and signed the settlement agreement. One slap had gotten me 2 4S dealerships in prime locations in both the new and old districts. Sitting in the car, I couldn't stop smiling. Miss Madison Carter really was the goddess of slaps. I even mimicked the way she'd slapped me and mocked her with obvious sarcasm, probably never imagined. One slap could cost her this much money. Her hand was practically made of gold. If she slapped me a few more times, maybe I could squeeze a few more dealerships out of the Carter family. These 2 locations were leased, and for the first 3 years, Charles would cover 40% of the rent, while Madison would personally cover the remaining 60%. The renovation and maintenance costs, along with utilities, would also be paid entirely by Madison. After 3 years, I'd take over those expenses myself. Shanghai was one of the country's top-tier cities, and both dealerships sat in prime commercial districts. Annual rent alone started in the tens of millions of yuan. In other words, 6 slaps had saved me tens of millions. That deal had been insanely profitable. Today, I was planning to inspect both dealerships personally. I sat in the car full of anticipation, while Ryan, sitting in the driver's seat, kept glancing at me in the back. He held himself back for a long time, before finally asking, "Hey Tyler, can I ask you something?" "Sure, what is it?" I replied cheerfully. I hadn't really noticed how conflicted Ryan looked. He scratched his head. trying desperately to figure out how to phrase it. It's just, I keep feeling like, you're not the same Tyler you used to be. Don't get mad, okay? It's just that you and the old Tyler feel kind of different. Really different. Almost like you're two different people. A warning bell immediately went off in my head. I looked at Ryan's face, filled with doubt, scrutiny, and hesitation, and thought to myself, so someone finally noticed. The Carter family barely knew the old Tyler, and my adoptive parents assumed that everything I'd suffered with the Carter family had simply caused a drastic change in my personality. Only Ryan, the older brother figure who had always looked out for the old Tyler, had realized that my changes went far beyond personality. It was as if the person inside, civism, had been replaced. Still, I didn't panic. I put on a serious expression, while thinking, not bad for a cop's son. That brain of his really does work. The fact that he even managed to phrase this indirectly must have taken everything he had. Ryan still couldn't quite figure out how to explain himself. He thought back to what the old Tyler had been like, then said uncertainly, I guess, maybe he'd still be locked in that basement. The old Tyler had been quiet, submissive, and willing to endure almost anything. Ryan believed people could change, but he also knew the saying that a person's nature was much harder to change than their circumstances. And the Tyler sitting behind him now, even after everything that had happened, still didn't feel like the same person. Not bad at all, my dear Ryan. I praised him silently, based on the original Tyler's memories and personality, combined with everything I knew about switched at birth heir stories. This world was currently still in the first timeline. If I hadn't transmigrated here, the original Tyler would probably still be living like an obedient servant in the Carter household, suffering both physically and emotionally, either dying young and becoming a resentful ghost waiting for a second timeline, or enduring humiliation until one day fate finally killed him and sent him into that second run. Ryan was a native of this world, and probably didn't even read switched at birth heir novels. Yet he'd somehow managed to guess this much. He really was surprisingly sharp, like a brute trying to thread an embroidery needle. Rough on the outside, but far more perceptive than he looked. Still, I'd already lived 2 lives, so I knew exactly what to say. My expression slowly changed, and I looked at Ryan before saying quietly, yeah, if I hadn't met you, I probably would still be locked in that basement right now. Me? Ryan sounded surprised. He stared at me in confusion. What does that have to do with me? I took a deep breath, as though remembering the time I'd been imprisoned there. No matter how much I begged, no matter how loudly I shouted, no one answered me. The door stayed locked. There were no windows, no lights, just darkness. I didn't even have food or water. At the time, I really thought I was going to die. So my mind started going back over everything that had happened in my life. Eventually, I remembered my school days, from the time I first met you in middle school, all the way through high school graduation. And that's when I suddenly realized just how pathetic my life had been. My voice carried a mixture of reflection and admiration. I was isolated, falsely accused, misunderstood by my own parents. No matter what happened, I never dared defend myself. I lived cautiously, always trying to please everyone. But then I suddenly realized that there had always been someone in my life who lived completely differently from me. He dared to chase the life he wanted. He dared to fight back. Even if it meant taking a beating, he'd still shout, no. He never tolerated wrongdoing, and he never tolerated being falsely accused. He would never swallow his anger in silence, even if everyone was blaming him, even if it was his own dad. Forcing his head down and demanding that he admit he was wrong, he still wouldn't bow. He'd shout, it wasn't my fault, and I won't admit to something I didn't do. A growing look of admiration entered my eyes. Back then, I kept thinking, if I could be like him and shout, it wasn't my fault, would I have avoided being locked in that basement, waiting to die? Would my life have ended differently? Maybe, I laughed at myself. Maybe I could have found a completely different path. But when they finally dragged me out, I lost my nerve again. I thought they had learned the truth. But instead, they whipped me for no reason, yelling and cursing with every lash. Each strike shattered another piece of the fantasy I'd been clinging to, and slowly forced me to face my future. What exactly was waiting for me? Was I going to stay in the Carter family and keep being treated like that until I eventually died in humiliation? Or would I follow the path my adoptive parents had planned for me and live an ordinary, unnoticed life? God dog. I mimicked the way Robert Carter had swung the rattan whip, then said firmly, honestly, I should thank Robert Carter. His whip woke me up and shattered every illusion I had. It forced me to finally face my future. That's when I realized that throughout my life, there had always been someone protecting me, someone willing to speak up for me. He lived the kind of life I wished I could live. He was a light in my life, showing me how a person should truly live, and what it really meant to live for yourself. My fate belongs to me, not to heaven. What kind of road I walk is my decision. I pointed at myself, looking almost crazed. I refuse to be locked in a basement, treated like garbage, and someday die a humiliating death. I don't want to live like my adoptive parents either, cautiously spending my whole life as an ordinary civil servant, starting from the bottom and slowly climbing toward whatever position they expect me to reach. I want to live a spectacular life. I want a life that's truly mine. I want to prove to everyone through my own actions that I decide how my life is lived. After saying that, I gradually calmed down again, then looked seriously at Ryan. Ryan, do you know why I brought you with me? If this were only about gratitude, I could have simply given you a motorcycle. So why didn't I? Ryan shook his head, clearly confused. I continued, because you're that light in my life. When I was at my lowest, you showed me the kind of person I wanted to become. I want both of us to live brilliantly, to shine as brightly as the moon in the night sky. I want us to carve out a road together, straight to the top. I'll never let the person who gave me that first ray of hope fade away into obscurity and disappear into the crowd like everyone else. Ryan listened to my words, and warmth surged through his chest. He scratched his head awkwardly, feeling even more guilty than before. He had just been wondering whether the timid little brother he once knew had changed because someone else had taken his place. He never imagined the change had actually been inspired by him, and Ryan knew he wasn't nearly as amazing as I made him sound. He had only made it into a junior college, and had once thought becoming a street punk wouldn't be such a bad life. If it hadn't been for his little brother, he might really have ended up as nothing more than a delinquent. Those expensive motorcycles would have been things he could only admire at dealerships, maybe sit on them for a few minutes and dream, without ever having the chance to own one himself. Ryan said awkwardly, Tyler, you're making me embarrassed talking like that, but don't worry. If you really believe in me this much, then I'm not the kind of coward who's going to back down. From now on, we'll do this together and build something of our own. Exactly, I grinned. When brothers stand together, nothing can stop them. Come on, let's go check out our 4S dealerships. One day, not just Shanghai City or Guangdong Province. This entire country, this entire world will be our stage. Let's go! Ryan's blood was boiling now. My grand vision had fired him up completely. Let's go see our dealerships. Meanwhile, deep within Mount Zhongnan, inside an ancient Taoist temple that had stood for 1,000 years, an elderly Taoist with white hair and a youthful face suddenly opened his eyes. He raised his fingers and performed a quick calculation, then murmured, could another great upheaval be coming? It's time. That boy should descend the mountain and find his family. Girl, the old Taoist called to a young woman, where's your junior brother? Go find him and bring him here, at the Carter family's estate in Binhai District. A Maybach slowly entered the underground garage, its deep, steady engine echoing through the open space. The front passenger door opened, and a woman around 30, with a graceful figure and a meticulously maintained appearance, stepped out wearing a perfectly tailored women's suit. Her eyes hidden behind sunglasses, she looked beautiful and capable, while radiating an unmistakably commanding presence. He swept her gaze across the underground garage, looking over the busy servants and security guards. And irritation immediately flashed across her face. Are all of you blind? She raised her voice, questioning the servants and guards throughout the garage. Second, Ms. Carter is back, and not one of you came over to greet her? But the guards and servants only gave her a casual glance, before going right back to their work, as though she didn't exist. This is outrageous. The woman looked as though she'd suffered some enormous insult, and snapped angrily, "You useless trash. You lowlifes. You take the Carter family's money and still dare act arrogant here? Are you deliberately trying to disrespect second Miss Carter?" Jessica Lee. At that moment, a deep and powerful male voice echoed through the underground garage. There wasn't even any anger in it. He merely called the woman's name, yet she instantly trembled, as though an invisible force had crushed her arrogance. Like a cat that had just been caught misbehaving, she immediately shrank back, lowering her head and not daring to make another sound. The man who had arrived was Butler Bennett, a figure whose status in the Carter family was second only to Charles himself. Within the Carter family, and even throughout Ben High District, aside from Charles, Butler Bennett was the person people feared and respected most. His relationship with Charles went far beyond that of an ordinary servant and master. Butler Bennett had been taken in by the Carter family as a child, and had grown up alongside Charles. From elementary school all the way through college, they were rarely apart. Ross. Later, when Charles went overseas to build his career, Butler Bennett became his most capable right-hand man, handling matters that couldn't be brought into the light. After they returned home, many of his old methods could no longer be used because the environment had changed. But Butler Bennett relied on his own ability and Charles's support to quickly adapt to the rules back home, and once again became Charles's most trusted lieutenant, with Charles working openly and Butler Bennett operating from the shadows. Charles successfully seized control of Sunrise Group. As the person who had followed Charles through everything and earned his absolute trust, Butler Bennett was generously rewarded as well. Charles transferred all the companies he had founded overseas into Butler Bennett's hands. Butler Bennett then returned to his ancestral home region, Handong Province, where he founded Handong Evergreen Food Group Co. Ltd. With the Carter family's backing, it took him very little time to become a major force in Handong Province's food industry. Like Charles, Butler Bennett eventually stepped away from day-to-day management and allowed his eldest son to take over. Once his son's position was secure, he returned to the Carter family and resumed his role as their butler. And Grace Carter, Robert Carter's wife, was actually Butler Bennett's third daughter. That was exactly why Jessica Lee was so terrified of him. Even though she wasn't one of Butler Bennett's own descendants, and her status in the Carter family was far above that of an ordinary employee, she still didn't dare act out in front of him. "Full of energy today, aren't you?" Butler Bennett slowly clapped his hands. The words sounded almost like an elder praising a junior, but there wasn't the slightest approval on his face. To Jessica, the sharp sound of those claps was practically a death sentence, and she began trembling. Jessica knew exactly how terrifying Butler Bennett could be. In a place like Shanghai City, perhaps his influence wasn't absolute, but if he decided he wanted to eat fish, that fish's only choice was how it would be prepared. Scaled, gutted, and served on the table. Enough. The rear door of the car opened, and another woman, also dressed in a suit, with short hair and light makeup. A sharp, capable-looking woman stepped down, holding a small case file in her hand. She walked over to Jessica and said calmly, "This was my fault. On the way back, I happened to take on a case from this area, and I spent the whole trip reading through the file. So I forgot to tell Jessica what was happening at home. That's how this misunderstanding happened." After saying that, she casually stuffed the file into Jessica's arms and instructed, "I've already reviewed this case. Go speak with the plaintiff for me. The defendant has agreed to mediation. See what the plaintiff thinks. Oh, and the amount involved in this case is pretty substantial. Tell the plaintiff. The court is currently pushing dispute resolution measures before trial. So getting a case like this all the way to a formal hearing isn't easy. If they agree to mediation, it can be resolved much faster, and the mediation agreement will still have legal force. The court will recognize it, and they can apply for compulsory enforcement later if necessary. Go. Don't keep the plaintiff waiting." Jessica looked as though she'd just been granted a pardon. She hurriedly gathered everything and slipped into the car. Only then did Butler Bennett's expression finally relax somewhat and soften a little. "Hannah," Butler Bennett said gently, "coming home at a time like this. Are you trying to make life difficult for this old butler?" "Uncle Bennett," Hannah Carter said playfully, "of course not. I'd just been away for a long time. I miss Mom and Dad, so I came home to visit. Besides, didn't they say my biological little brother was found? I wanted to meet My own little brother, too. Watch how you address me. Butler Bennett's expression changed. It's working hours right now. Address me by my position. Fine, Butler Bennett, Hannah muttered with a pout, clearly unhappy. The young master is in the second-floor study. Butler Bennett sighed. A trace of helplessness flashing through his eyes. Hannah said nothing more, and walked straight into the private elevator, just as the doors were about to close. Butler Bennett suddenly called out, Hannah, don't underestimate him. What are you talking about? Hannah looked completely unaware of the situation, and asked in confusion. She had no idea what Butler Bennett meant. Neither Mr. Carter nor I will interfere, Butler Bennett said in a low voice, his tone carrying unquestionable resolve. As the elevator doors slowly closed, Butler Bennett could only shake his head. If the younger generation really intended to take things this far, then all he could do was clean up whatever mess they left behind. Once the elevator doors closed, the faintly girlish look on Hannah's face instantly turned cold and sharp. A fierce light entered her eyes, but it wasn't the look of someone consumed by hatred. It looked more like a battle-hardened general, eager for the war that was about to begin. Filled with confidence and anticipation, she reached the second floor and entered the study. The Bass, Robert Carter, Grace Carter, Victoria Carter, and Madison Carter were already inside. Ethan Carter was the only one missing. Hannah wasn't surprised by that. Before coming home, she had already learned most of what had happened. Here, take this. The moment Robert saw his second daughter return, he hurriedly picked up a relatively thin file from the desk and handed it to her. That little. The words reached his lips, but he forcibly swallowed them back and changed it to, your little brother seems to know a lot about the law, especially criminal law, and the Public Security Administration punishments law. So, after thinking it over, I figured you're probably the only one in this family. We can rely on, Hannah didn't say much. She dropped onto the couch, picked up the relatively thin file, and began reading. Tell me everything that happened from beginning to end. Without looking up, Hannah said, Dad, Mom, Victoria, Madison, don't exaggerate anything, just because you made mistakes yourselves. She raised her head and looked at her parents and two younger sisters, her gaze sharp, as she repeated firmly, remember, do not embellish anything. Tell me exactly what happened. From what I've learned, our seventh brother is extremely careful about preserving evidence. If you exaggerate or fabricate facts, not only will that fail to help, it'll mislead me. This wasn't because Hannah knew her family especially well. It came from her deep understanding of human nature. After working as a lawyer for so many years, she knew exactly what hatred could drive people to do. When someone hated another person, they could easily fabricate facts or even blame their own mistakes on the other person, and that would put her at a serious disadvantage. The others exchanged glances. Although they weren't happy with what Hannah had said, they understood how serious the situation was. So they did their best to strip away their personal emotions and objectively recount everything that had happened. After listening to their account and carefully reading through the documents, Hannah rubbed her temples in frustration. After a while, she finally said slowly, I have to admit, Dad, Mom, and Madison, the fact that you're even sitting here right now is because he chose to let you off. What do you mean by that? Robert immediately became unhappy. Why are you taking that brat's side? This isn't about taking anyone's side. Hannah wasn't angry. Instead, she patiently explained, he said something. People inside the government system and people outside it pursue different things. And he was absolutely right. What's so different? Robert was still angry, but he managed to control himself. When Tyler had said those words, Robert had taken them as mockery, but coming from his second daughter, he could at least force himself to listen. Isn't everyone just after promotions and money? That's exactly where the difference lies. Hannah analyzed the situation with perfect clarity. For people inside the government system, promotion comes first. For people outside the system, making money comes first. That's why people inside and outside the system can face the exact same situation and react completely differently. Take Ethan's case as an example. Hannah continued, for someone outside the government system, as long as there's enough money involved, they'll naturally side with Ethan. Take a lawyer like me. If Dad pays enough in legal fees, a lawyer can treat Ethan like their own father and do everything possible to minimize his charges. But people inside the government system are different. Hannah's tone became firm. If handling this case properly can help someone get promoted, they'll investigate it thoroughly and make their decision according to what their superiors want. If the order is to release someone, they'll focus on the least serious offense and find the most appropriate justification. But if the goal is to put someone behind bars, then, as long as there's evidence, they'll push for the harshest sentence possible, even if that evidence isn't particularly strong. That doesn't necessarily matter, as long as they get the person locked up and their superiors notice, and it helps pave the way for their career. That's enough. Then what if we pay them? Robert started to ask. Money is a liability to them. Hannah cut him off. A higher position brings greater authority, and greater authority can bring far more financial benefits later. So acting incorruptible for a while isn't difficult, especially in a case being watched by higher-ups. She looked at everyone and spoke earnestly. Dad, Mom, and Madison. Seventh brother's adoptive father and his friend's father. Both come from military backgrounds, so there are military connections involved. One of their connections has risen to a provincial leadership position, giving them political backing. Another is the current chief of the city police department, giving them strong law enforcement connections. The fact that all of you can still sit here, that the Carter family is still completely intact, and that this whole scandal hasn't exploded across the city, means the other side has already shown you enormous mercy. Grandpa and Uncle Bennett have been using everything they have to keep this contained for you. As a lawyer, Hannah frequently dealt with courts and other government agencies, and understood those systems extremely well. She knew just how much official rank and authority mattered in this society. Her explanation left everyone in the room deep in thought. So there's absolutely nothing we can do, Robert asked unwillingly. He simply couldn't accept this outcome. The others felt the same way, and all looked at Hannah expectantly. It's not that there's nothing we can do, Hannah said. It's just going to be complicated. It depends on what kind of outcome Mom and Dad want. My factory was located in Linjiang District, inside an industrial complex built in 1990. It wasn't especially old, but the passage of time had still left deep marks across the buildings. Linjiang District was one of Shanghai City's 5 old urban districts, located along the western edge of the city, right beside the modest Hongya Mountain, because it bordered a river originating from Hongya Mountain, known as the Qingshui River. The district had been named Linjiang. That same river was also where the Jiang in Shanghai City originally came from, because water was easy to access here. Linjiang District had once become a major concentration point for Shanghai City's state-owned factories. During the last century, it had been one of the city's major economic engines and industrial development zones. However, as the wave of economic reform swept across the country, Shanghai was designated as a city open to foreign trade, and its development gradually shifted toward port-based shipping and large-scale import and export commerce, combined with the continued restructuring of state-owned enterprises. Linjiang District quickly fell into decline. Shanghai City had once tried to reverse that decline, planning to rebuild the district into a manufacturing base for both light and heavy industry. Unfortunately, Linjiang was relatively far from the main urban center, and although the Qingshui River had river in its name, in reality it was little more than a large, fast-flowing stream, originating from Hongya Mountain. It rushed eastward toward the sea. Its channel was narrow, and even at its deepest point, it was only about 3 meters deep. The riverbed was also filled with sand and rocks, and the current was strong, making it completely unsuitable for inland shipping. The investment produced little improvement. Later, environmental policies aimed at protecting water sources made the district's situation even worse, and it never recovered. It wasn't until 10 years later, when Shanghai City began developing its tourism resources, that Linjiang District used its proximity to Hongya Mountain and its beautiful natural scenery to slowly begin recovering. Because the area had once housed so many state-owned factories, combined with poorly executed later planning, a large number of abandoned industrial buildings remained. Some were demolished to make way for tourist attractions. Others had no real value and were simply left behind to slowly decay beneath the wind and rain. Through his connections, Tyler had already leased one former motorcycle factory that had originally been funded by the local government and jointly established by Jianghai Automobile Group and Yamaha. At first, the factory had been extremely successful, but it soon declined after Jianghai Automobile Group went bankrupt. Yamaha withdrew its investment, along with several other problems, and the factory eventually collapsed. Now, all that remained were the factory buildings, warehouses, and other fixed assets. The production lines and other equipment had long since been dismantled, leaving behind nothing but an empty shell. But I didn't need the old production lines. What I wanted was the space itself. This empty facility came with factory buildings, dormitories, testing grounds, and warehouses. And because the roads and basic infrastructure had been built relatively recently, they were still in good condition, more than enough to satisfy my needs. Most importantly, the rent was cheap. Anywhere else in Shanghai City, finding a factory this suitable would have been nearly impossible, and even if I found one, the price would have been far beyond what I could afford. For me, this factory was practically a perfect match. Besides, my adoptive dad already had plenty of connections, and the local government also thought such a massive facility, sitting here unused, was a complete waste. So they leased it to me for 1 million yuan a year. Of course, the government had its own considerations. We only signed a 3-year lease. And whether it would be renewed afterward would depend on the situation. I arrived at the factory early today. Yesterday, I'd already inspected the storefronts. The 2 main dealerships needed to be renovated, which would take quite some time. As for the smaller stores, I planned to model them after the basic rural sales outlets from my previous life. The simplest ones wouldn't even need renovation. All they needed was a sign out front, along with 1 store manager and 2 or 3 salespeople, and that would be enough to keep the store running. With such a simple business model, basic employee training became especially important. The staff needed to understand our product's main selling points and other essential information. So, today I'd called all the sales staff to the factory. The designers and assembly workers would give them basic product training and simple troubleshooting instruction, along with fundamental repair knowledge. We're finally starting to look like a real company. I walked through the workshop with Ryan, a faint sense of satisfaction in my voice. Even though this was only an assembly plant, it still operated on an assembly line model. Every single step was currently done by hand, with almost no mechanization at all. The operation might be small, and we might not have many workers, but I had no intention of running it like some small workshop, where a handful of workers handled multiple stages at once, assigning several different stations to the same worker or the same small group. I firmly believed this factory would never stop here, and it certainly wouldn't rely on manual labor forever. Building this fully manual assembly line had forced me to hire a lot of workers, which looked like unnecessary overhead, but in reality it significantly improved efficiency. At the same time, these workers were also the foundation for the future. Once a true automated production line was built, they would be able to adapt quickly, reducing the amount of retraining required. Right now, I needed to seize the market as quickly as possible and capture as much market share as I could. So, efficiency came first. Yeah, Ryan also looked out at the busy workers inside the factory and couldn't help feeling emotional. We had started with only 5 people and a single supervisor. Yet in less than half a month, we had already expanded into a workforce of nearly 1,000 people, and that number would keep growing. Oh, right, Tyler. While Ryan was still marveling at everything, he suddenly remembered something. What about those guys I brought over? Oh, right, I almost forgot about them. I slapped my forehead, pretending I'd only just remembered. I actually have a plan for them. I pulled Ryan aside and lowered my voice. I told you before, we need people who can handle certain kinds of jobs for us. First, you don't have to worry about their pay. I'm not going to treat them badly. The second, not all of them need to officially join the company. I need them to keep operating under their current identities. Basically, they'll become street-connected guys on our payroll with steady support. A complicated look flashed through Ryan's eyes, and mixed emotions filled his heart. People often said your values followed your looks, but they also followed where you stood. Once your position changed, your perspective naturally changed with it. Ryan already felt that his status was completely different from before. In the future, he was going to be someone people called Mr. Ryan, and toward the street punks he had once thought were cool. He now felt a faint trace of disgust and contempt. Still, those guys were his brothers. Letting them continue living like that would be embarrassing if people later found out they were connected to him, and made him lose face. Even paying to support them now made Ryan feel a little painful inside. This was a business he and Tyler had built together. And Tyler's money was basically his money. So spending Tyler's money was the same as spending Mr. Ryan's money. And Mr. Ryan's heart hurt. No. I wagged my finger and said dismissively, that's way too low level. These guys, I want to position them as our plainclothes network. Plainclothes, you understand? These plainclothes guys, well, looking at Ryan's clear, slightly clueless, still very student-like eyes. I suddenly had no idea how to explain it. My brother could be genuinely smart when he wanted to be. But when he was dumb, he was really dumb. So I decided to explain it another way. I've prepared some courses for those guys of yours. They'll study law and physical conditioning. The legal courses will mainly cover criminal law, the Public Security Administration punishments law, and some civil law. As for physical training, have your dad help us find some veterans and retired police officers to train them. I'll set some performance standards and exams. Tell your guys, none of it will be too difficult. They just need to pass. These things will be extremely useful to them in the future, especially the Public Security Administration punishments law. They need to study that one carefully. That's going to be the main focus of my testing. I also hired a no-rules fighting expert at a high price. His name is Marcus Chen. He'll train them for 3 months. Everything I'm arranging is practical, so they need to take it seriously and learn properly. As for you, I patted Ryan on the shoulder and said earnestly, starting today, you're not going to be my driver anymore. I've arranged a special teacher for you. Who? The moment Ryan heard the word teacher, his head immediately started hurting. Butler Bennett. I narrowed my eyes and said thoughtfully, it won't be long, just 1 week. All you have to do is follow him around. There aren't any textbooks, and you don't need to force yourself to learn some specific skill. You just need to stay with Butler Bennett and listen to his stories. Listen to what he and Grandpa went through in Seattle, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, and after they came back home. Learn how they fought their way up, what they won, and what they lost. That's it? Ryan froze when he heard that, then asked in surprise. Seriously? I smiled. Actually, you have another option. I told you before, to read more books about management. Learn management experience from Mr. Lee, and work toward transferring from junior college into a bachelor's program. So tell me, Ryan, how many of those books have you read? How many times have you gone to Mr. Lee for advice? And what preparation have you made for transferring into a bachelor's program? Ryan's expression immediately became awkward. He stammered, Tyler, you know me. I'm just not cut out for studying. I asked you to read, so you'd understand what management actually means. I said seriously, I told you to learn from Mr. Lee, so you could use other people's experiences as a warning and avoid making the same mistakes they made. And I wanted you to transfer into a bachelor's program so that while you're in college, you can build as many connections as possible. College isn't just a place to study. It's also one of the foundations for building your social network. But you aren't willing to do any of that, and you still can't let go of that group of brothers of yours. So I'll arrange something. That suits you better. A butler? Ryan grumbled unhappily. It wasn't that he looked down on the position. He just didn't like the idea of doing that kind of work. Give me a break. I looked at him with disgust. Make you a butler? I'd rather hire a gorilla. At least a gorilla can't understand human speech. So it wouldn't get fooled so easily. Butler Bennett. I had my dad look into him. He's definitely not just some ordinary butler. Once you spend time with him, you'll understand. Just then, someone came running toward us. I looked over carefully. Wait, wasn't that the man I'd planted? Inside the Carter family estate, Sam Carter? Sam? I frowned slightly and asked in confusion, why are you here, young master? Sam gave me an honest grin, then said seriously, I was worried it wouldn't be safe to talk over the phone. What if my phone was being monitored, or somebody was listening in? So I came here myself to tell you in person. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What are you doing? Acting out some spy thriller? If you're worried, just get a new phone and number. And besides, we're not important enough for anyone to spend serious money wiretapping us. Still, seeing how nervous Sam looked, I added, "All right, tell me, what happened? Are those people at the estate planning something again?" Second Miss Carter came back yesterday. Sam pulled out his phone and handed it to me. This is a copy of the video I saved. They were talking about all kinds of stuff in the study, their plans and what they wanted to do. I couldn't really understand most of it, but it sounded like they were planning something against you. Yesterday, I frowned. After thinking for a moment, I asked, "Then why didn't you report it yesterday?" "Because Butler Bennett brought my family over yesterday," Sam said with some embarrassment. "So I took the day off to get my dad and mom settled. My dad and little sister started work today. When I came back to work today, I checked the surveillance footage and asked Frank about it. That's when I found out." "I see." I shook my head. "Looks like they deliberately moved my man out of the way. But it didn't really matter. I'd arranged all of this openly from the beginning anyway. So I'd expected something like this. And the reason I planted someone there wasn't purely to spy on them. I mainly wanted to test Charles's attitude and at the same time give Robert Carter and his family a warning, so they'd learn to restrain themselves. All right, just don't let it happen again." I didn't blame Sam. It looked like Charles and Butler Bennett still leaned slightly toward Robert's side of the family, but they were also making it clear they intended to stay neutral and avoid interfering too much. That made sense? The original Tyler had been separated from the Carter family for so many years, while they had all grown up together, emotionally speaking. It was only natural that Charles and Butler Bennett would favor them a little. The Carter family really just won't leave us alone. Ryan immediately realized that this second sister was probably coming after us too. But after glancing at me, he grinned again. "Man, they're loaded. Looks like they've sent us another walking ATM. "That's hard to say." I shook my head. Ever since that whole incident, I'd understood that even if I refused to follow the original plot, my twisted connection with this family wasn't going away. So I'd investigated all the important members of the Carter family, and I knew this second sister wasn't some brainless idiot like Madison, but seeing Ryan's expression, I couldn't help giving him a wicked grin. 3 minutes. I want everything there is to know about this woman. Within 3 minutes. No, actually. Right now. Ryan dramatically threw up his hands and looked at me helplessly. "Tyler, are you seriously doing some improv as an overbearing billionaire CEO? What is this? Do you think we're filming a romance drama? And that's your biological sister. Are you planning to start some kind of forbidden sibling romance with your own sister? And just so you know, investigating people's private information without permission can be illegal. Be careful or the cops might invite you in for a little chat one day." I looked completely unimpressed, my eyes full of contempt. "See, this is why you're not professional. Investigating someone illegally is one thing, but asking around about a person is perfectly fine. Besides, if Butler Bennett handled it, maybe he couldn't give me everything within 3 minutes. But getting me a detailed report within 3 days would be child's play for him. And even if you don't have her information, I do." I smugly pulled out my phone and began reading. Hannah Carter, Robert and Grace Carter's second precious daughter. Born in 1988, the year of the dragon. Exactly 30 years old this year. During high school, she attended Zhanghai No. 3 High School. So technically, she's even our alum. She graduated as the top scorer in her school and got into the law department at Yanjing University of Political Science and Law. That's basically one of the temples of legal education. After graduating, she spent 3 years gaining experience in Zhanghai, then moved to the capital, and now she's thriving in the legal world. When it comes to her career, her resume is ridiculously impressive. She joined 818 Law Firm, one of the country's top law firms. They work with major tech companies, like Penguin and Ali year-round. Among the civil cases she's represented, there have been 63 corporate disputes involving more than 10 million yuan, 163, and more than 30 criminal cases. She's extremely serious about her work. Her clients have given her so many appreciation banners. She could practically open a little exhibition hall. More than 20 of them. Back when she worked in Zhanghai, she was even awarded the title of Outstanding Legal Professional of Zhanghai. She's basically a female powerhouse in the legal world. And seriously impressive. Ryan's eyes widened. As soon as he heard all that. Flamer. No way. Tyler, when did you turn into a detective? Did you hire a private investigator? Or do you have some kind of secret intelligence network that's already been digging into everyone? I waved my phone, looking smug. Baidu Baiki and 360 Bake both have detailed profiles on her. Even 808 Law Firm, where she currently works, has a profile of her on its official website. She's practically a celebrity. Looking her up is ridiculously easy. Public information is easy to find. The hard part is finding what isn't public. Lulala, Demacia, just then. My phone suddenly started ringing. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen, and the caller location showed. The capital. I chuckled softly, and looked at Ryan and Sam. Want to make a little bet? Just 10 yuan. I bet this number belongs to my biological second sister. Is that even worth betting on? Ryan rolled his eyes and said irritably, obviously it's her. Who else would randomly call you right now? I don't think it is. Sam smiled honestly and shook his head. When I left, I saw Second Miss Carter's car just entering the underground garage. There's no way she'd call the boss that quickly. I smiled, looking completely confident. I still bet it's her. Either of you want to change your answer? Just pick up already. Stop dragging it out, Ryan urged. Heh, I answered the call and turned on speakerphone. My expression instantly became solemn, as though I'd switched straight into acting mode. Hello, who is this? Is this Tyler? A gentle woman's voice came through the phone, without the slightest hint of arrogance. I'm your second sister, Hannah. I heard a while ago that you'd finally come home. When you went missing all those years ago, I was devastated for a long time. Jake, as she spoke, she actually sounded genuinely regretful and terribly worried. Second sister? My voice changed too, taking on a trembling, emotional quality. As I choked out, Sis, you have no idea how much I've missed you. I still remember you holding me when I was little. Sis, my own sister, I've missed you so much. I threw myself fully into the performance, my voice overflowing with emotion. Tyler, my little brother, you've suffered so much out there. The woman on the other end sounded moved too, and started crying, speaking between sobs. I actually went to your adoptive parents' house, but nobody was home, and I couldn't find you. I finally managed to get your number. Tyler, I know Mom and Dad were wrong, but that shouldn't affect the bond between you and me, right? Can we meet? I pretended to be deeply moved too, and started sniffling. Sis, my own sister, Paulette, I knew it. I knew not everyone in that family could hate me. Sis, I've missed you so much. I wish I could see you right this second. Where are you? I kept acting, my voice filled with urgency. I've missed you so much too, Tyler. Hannah sobbed on the other end. Then it's settled. 5 o'clock. Let's meet at Happy Outlet Plaza. You have to come, okay? You absolutely have to. I will. I cried too. I'll head there right now. See you soon. Hannah kept crying without saying anything. Nothing but sobs came through the phone, and she still didn't hang up. Sis, I kept crying too. My quiet sobs gradually turned into loud wailing, then became downright heartbreaking, almost hysterical, as though I were putting on the performance of a lifetime. Either way, I absolutely refused to hang up first. So the two of us launched at each other over the phone for nearly half an hour. Eventually, Hannah seemed unable to take it anymore and hung up first. Beep, 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 the call ended. A second ago, I'd been crying like my world was ending, almost as though I might pass out, but I instantly became energetic again, my face practically glowing, as if the man who'd just been wailing his heart out hadn't been me at all. The sudden transformation left Ryan and Sam completely stunned. Wait, what? Weren't you just crying your eyes out? Like you two were the closest siblings in the world, and neither of you could bear to hang up. Why'd you stop crying the second she disconnected? Ryan opened his mouth and stared at me blankly. What were you thinking? I calmly shot back. What did you think that was? Deep sibling love? You're thinking way too much. Life is a stage, and everything depends on your acting. Want to bet she hasn't even left the underground garage yet? She's probably still taking her sweet time getting ready, before heading out, I guessed. Sam quickly pulled out his phone and checked, then took 20 yuan from his pocket, handing 10 to me, and 10 to Ryan. Boss, You're incredible. You're more accurate than the fortune teller back in my village. Ryan leaned over to look. It was surveillance footage someone had recorded on a phone. The image wasn't very clear, but they could still make out a woman leaving one room and entering another. Then 2 more women came out and met in the hallway, whispering together for a while before heading off to different rooms. There was no need to guess. They were obviously women from the Carter family. Your boss is the real fortune teller, I said smugly. Let's go. Time to meet my second sister. Ryan glanced at me and cautiously asked, should we call the police ahead of time? No need. I shook my head. Nothing's going to happen today. Hannah is a lawyer, and judging from what we've seen so far, she's also very good at hiding her true intentions. So since she's the one asking to meet me, she won't give me anything I can use against her. And someone like her, if she decides to come after us, will be much harder to deal with than those 2 idiots, Madison and Victoria, I said with a serious expression, then immediately started walking away. But just then, something occurred to me, and I looked back at Sam. Do you know anyone currently on duty in the estate's underground garage surveillance room? Sam nodded. Go back now, I instructed. Call that friend of yours and tell him to pay attention when Hannah comes out later. See how many people get into the car and exactly who goes with her. Meanwhile, back at the Carter estate, Hannah had changed into casual clothes and put on light makeup. With a handbag over her shoulder, she headed down to the garage and had barely gotten into her car when her 2 younger sisters opened the doors and climbed straight inside, squeezing Hannah between them. You two? Hannah immediately felt a headache coming on. Didn't I tell you both to stay home? Why are you coming with me? She asked helplessly. We just want to go out together, Victoria said sweetly. You finally came home, so I want to go shopping with you too. I'm not going shopping. Hannah was starting to get irritated. Do you seriously think I'm going out to have fun? Don't worry, we won't cause trouble, Madison quickly reassured her. We'll just walk around. And that brat isn't, Anyway, we won't interfere. And if anything important happens, we can protect you, or act as witnesses for you. Hannah stared at them in disbelief. These 2 were saying they would protect her and serve as witnesses. What kind of joke was that? With Tyler's ridiculously cautious personality, protecting her from him was practically unnecessary. If a real conflict breaks out, I'll be thankful if those 2 don't get themselves arrested again. That alone would be a miracle. And they're talking about protecting me? I'd be the one protecting them. Hannah suddenly started feeling a little hopeless about coming back to help with this mess. She was annoyed too, and she hated Tyler for returning and turning the entire family upside down, nearly ruining Madison and Victoria in the process. Judging from everything she'd seen so far, those 2 were completely outclassed by Tyler intellectually. Dragging 2 useless teammates along suddenly gave her a very bad feeling, but trying to force the 2 of them out of the car didn't seem realistic either. They were both stubborn, and there was no way she'd be able to send them home. Forget it, Hannah glanced at the driver and said, I'll drive myself. The driver didn't argue, and simply got out, leaving Hannah to take the driver's seat. Only then did she say, you 2 can come, but I'm warning you, the reason we're going today is completely different from what you're imagining. He's our biological brother. No matter how much we dislike him, no matter how much we hate him or refuse to accept him, even if we think he's nothing but bad luck. That he came home for 2 days and caused trouble, refused to listen, and turned the entire family upside down. Hannah paused, then continued, he's still our biological little brother. A little brother who was missing for more than 10 years before finally coming home. Someone who was mistreated by his adoptive family. Who never had nice clothes, and suffered through all kinds of hardship. What? Victoria immediately protested. Suffered through hardship? Shut up. Hannah cut her off without hesitation. That's how you have to think. And that's how you have to talk. We need to show him that we're gentle and generous. That we treat him well and make him believe we're the ones who truly care about him, not the people who treat him like dirt. Then Hannah decided that still wasn't enough. She pulled the car over and said, remember this. When you're capable, make him think you're incapable. When you're going to act, make him think you won't. When you're close, make him think you're far away. When you're far away, make him think you're close. We're going there today to buy him gifts. And clothes. Pick the most expensive and the best ones. and act as enthusiastic and happy as possible. Understand? If not, get out of the car and go home right now. Outlet Plaza, whose full name was Jianghai Outlet International Trade Center, was a massive commercial complex located in the heart of the Port Trade District, a large shopping center filled with domestic and international, affordable luxury brands. For Jianghai City's middle class, shopping there was definitely something of a luxury. But for wealthy businessmen and powerful families, it was nothing more than an ordinary place to shop. That was all. From the factory I'd leased in Linjiang District, driving to Outlet Plaza would take about an hour and a half, assuming there wasn't heavy traffic. But from the prestigious Carter Estate in Binhai District, the trip took only a little over 40 minutes. By the time my car slowly entered the underground garage, the three Carter sisters had already been waiting for almost another half hour, and the last call I'd received, asking where I was, had come just 10 minutes earlier. "Aren't you going to meet that wonderful sister of yours?" Ryan turned around, looking at me resting with my eyes closed in the back seat, and asked teasingly. I didn't even lift my eyelids, and merely replied calmly, "No rush. Making my dear sister wait a little longer won't hurt." "Wait?" Ryan looked confused. He scratched his head and said, "From the way you two talked on the phone, this second sister actually sounds like she really cares about you. There's finally one normal person in that family, and you're deliberately keeping her waiting this long. Aren't you afraid you'll hurt her feelings?" During the entire trip, I deliberately kept the car at the lowest reasonable speed and taken my sweet time getting here. Traffic had already been somewhat congested, so we'd arrived much later than originally expected. And throughout the journey, every time Hannah called me, I put her on speakerphone. So naturally, Ryan heard every word clearly. At first, he assumed Hannah's concern was nothing more than fake sympathy. But after hearing it repeatedly, he started wondering whether there might actually be some sincerity behind it. Maybe she really was different from the rest of the Carter family and genuinely cared about me. Well, care. The corner of my mouth curled into a mocking smile. I sneered. Why would Hannah care about me? Because I'm handsome? Or because she and I share a little blood? We were born to the same parents, but we've been separated for all these years. So why would she suddenly be different from everyone else and care so much about me? Ryan, I'm telling you, some things can't be judged by appearances alone. Ryan shook his head. Although he couldn't find any real argument against me, he still stuck to his opinion. I just think you're looking at it the wrong way. You shouldn't assume everyone is that bad. What the Carter family did before was definitely disgusting. But not everyone in a rich family has to be like that. Even a dragon has 9 sons. And every one of them is different. There has to be at least one normal person, right? A dragon has 9 sons. Only then did I slowly open my eyes and look at Ryan. I looked left and right, up and down, from every possible angle, for a long time, yet I still couldn't see where that occasional spark of intelligence came from. If anything, he looked even more innocent than Sam. His dad had seriously protected him too well. He had never experienced how ugly society could really be. I silently complained, then chuckled. Ryan, since you think she genuinely cares about me, let me ask you something. Why do you think Robert Carter, Grace Carter, Madison Carter, and Ethan Carter all hate me? Why did they team up to frame me and push me out? Ryan scratched his head helplessly. Because they're stupid? He couldn't figure it out either. Because of Fides. But I didn't give him a chance to continue and answered my own question. The moment I returned to the Carter family, it meant I was going to take a slice of the family fortune away from everyone else. And because I'm a son, my slice would theoretically be the biggest. Let's say the Carter family's wealth is divided into 10 shares, because I'm theoretically the only male heir. According to traditional expectations, I could probably take 9 of those shares, leaving all the sisters to split the last one. Sure, the Carter family is enormous. Even if 6 people split 1 share, they'd still live incredibly well. But how could that compare to 6 people splitting all 10 shares? I paused for a moment, letting Ryan process what I'd said, then continued. Do you know why those sisters treat Ethan so well? Because he's adopted, so he doesn't have real inheritance rights. Quote, to them, Ethan is basically a pet. From my perspective, all those sweet words of his are nothing more than him reading the room and telling people what they want to hear. But he really does know how to make them happy. And when a pet poses no threat to you, naturally you don't mind showering it with affection, but I'm different. The moment I officially return to the family, they go from 6 people splitting 10 shares to 6 people splitting 1. So how could they possibly like me? I continued. Even children understand wanting a bigger share, let alone grown adults. I sneered. Of course they care about me. Believe me, if I died right now, they'd immediately give me the grandest funeral imaginable. Tell the whole world how deeply they regretted everything. Talk about how horrible their past selves were, how cruel and disgusting they'd been, and claim they couldn't understand why they'd ever treated me that way. But as long as I'm alive, there's no real possibility of reconciliation. This is a conflict of phi until our interests align. That contradiction can't disappear. So my second sister can't genuinely be nice to me. The only thing she can do is lower my guard. Mockery flickered in my eyes, as if I had already seen through everything. If you want a more detailed explanation, go read Marxist philosophy, Mao, Deng, and Capital. They explain it far more clearly and far more brutally than I ever could. But those stupid women still haven't realized that the fake little brother they've doted on all this time is actually the one trying to swallow 9 shares of the cake. As for Robert and Grace, their situation is a little more complicated. They may have already figured out what Charles has planned. After all, Ethan and Charles are grandfather and grandson, even with a generation between them. They can't look completely unrelated. If you examine them carefully, there are still a few similarities. If Robert and Grace figured that out, then the reason they treat Ethan so well could be because they're arranging an escape route for the 6 sisters. And the reason they treat me so badly could also be explained as them trying to force me away from the Carter family, so their only son wouldn't get dragged into this mess. When parents truly love their child, they plan far into the future for them. But human motives were complicated. I still didn't know Robert, Grace's true intentions, nor did I know whether they were aware of Ethan's real identity. It was also possible that the couple had some completely different goal. There was no way to say for sure. Of course, these were only my own predictions, and there was no way I'd lay all of them out for Ryan. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. It was about right. So I said, Ryan, you don't need to stay here and wait for me. I have some things I need you to handle. We still don't know exactly what the other side is planning, but some preparations need to be made ahead of time. I needed Ryan to make a trip home and explain the situation to my adoptive parents and his dad. After finishing my instructions, I prepared to get out of the car. But just as I took a step, I stopped again, then turned back to Ryan. Oh, one more thing. After you're done at home, go straight to a phone store and buy a new phone. Register a new SIM card under your own name. Then head to the Carter estate. Talk to Butler Bennett first. After that, give Sam a hint. Tell him to come find you tonight. A hint? Ryan raised an eyebrow and asked in confusion, how am I supposed to hint at it? And will that dummy even understand? Do you really need me to teach you that? I said with some irritation. Just tap him on the head 3 times. Then walk away with your hands behind your back. Ryan, don't underestimate Sam. That guy is much smarter than you are. Ryan really was a little too straightforward. But Sam, just from the fact that he'd personally come all the way here today to contact me directly, I could already tell. He was nowhere near as simple as he looked. All right, get moving. I'm going to meet my dear sisters now. With that, I strode away. Lou, Lala, Demacia. Just then my phone rang again. I quickly answered and said anxiously, I'm coming, sisses. I'm coming. I'm almost there. Oh, you're in the lounge area? I'm coming. As I spoke, I pushed open the mall's doors and was immediately greeted by a dazzling blend of luxury and prosperity. Brilliant lights illuminated every corner. Designer logos glittered invitingly everywhere I looked. I had to admit, this place was even more luxurious than some upscale malls I'd seen in my previous life, by quite a margin. This so-called affordable luxury mall seemed to emphasize the luxury part, far more than the affordable part. Choosing this place for our meeting. Were they planning to bombard me with expensive gifts? Too bad. I'd gladly take the sugarcoating. But they could keep the cannonball. I mocked them silently, then adjusted my emotions once again, and walked forward with the swagger of someone who feared absolutely no one, heading toward our agreed meeting place. Madison Carter, Hannah Carter, and Victoria Carter had already been waiting in the lounge area for quite some time. Madison was dressed head to toe in designer brands. Her makeup immaculate, but hidden in her eyes was a faint trace of disgust. Hannah looked much gentler, dressed in simple, elegant clothing, with a warm smile on her face, as though she genuinely looked forward to a family reconciliation. Victoria was as lively as ever, dressed fashionably, and constantly glancing around. There wasn't the slightest flaw in her performance. She looked exactly like a sister curious to meet her long-lost brother. "He's here." Victoria, who had been looking around, was the first to notice me. A mixture of displeasure and restraint appeared on her face. She whispered to Hannah, "This guy seriously knows how to act important. He made us wait this long." Hannah was irritated too, but she glared at Victoria. If these two younger sisters hadn't insisted on coming, today's meeting probably would have gone much more smoothly. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in this world. As I walked up to them, our eyes met, and an awkward tension hung faintly in the air, even though they had agreed to endure it. Victoria and Madison's eyes were still filled with hatred and disgust, especially when they looked at me, swaggering like a victorious rooster, with my chin slightly raised, and that cocky, untouchable stride. The disgust in their eyes only grew stronger. Even Hannah felt a little contemptuous. Her first impression was that I was indeed intelligent, but only slightly smarter than her two foolish younger sisters. It seemed, I wasn't all that different from Victoria and Madison, the type who achieved a little success and immediately became arrogant, getting carried away with himself without understanding how dangerous the real world could be. But that was fine. Big Sis would teach me. Hannah quickly steadied herself again, and not a trace of contempt remained visible on her face. He was the first to break the silence, standing up with a smile and extending her hand. "Tyler, it's been so long. We've all missed you." I reached out and lightly shook Hannah's hand, then moved as though I wanted to give her a gentle hug. "Second sis, me too. I've wanted to see all of you so badly." Behind me, Madison and Victoria immediately twisted their faces into ugly expressions, their mouths moving non-stop as they silently cursed me. Hannah instantly felt another headache coming on. Her expression shifted, and she glared at the two of them, mouthing at those two idiots. "Cry? Cry already. Damn it, cry. Cry. Right now. Start crying immediately." Madison and Victoria were furious inside, but they had no choice. They desperately prepared themselves mentally, and reluctantly stood up. Apparently, members of the Carter family all had at least some natural talent for acting, no matter what any of us truly thought. At that moment, the four of us seemed to reach some kind of silent understanding, and embraced one another, our eyes filled with tears, as though every grudge from the past had vanished with the wind, leaving behind nothing but this precious reunion between siblings. First sis, second sis, fifth sis, sixth sis. "I'm sorry. Tyler, we're the ones who are sorry," all three cried at once. For a moment, the three Carter sisters were sobbing uncontrollably, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. I didn't mind joining the three Carter sisters in putting on this little show. Within this performance, it was as if I were a carefully arranged supporting actor, yet somehow carrying the composure of the lead. Among the three Carter sisters, Hannah maintained the same warm and caring expression from beginning to end. But the other two, Madison and Victoria, had expressions that were almost impossible to describe, like they'd swallowed something revolting, but still had to force themselves to smile, as though they were being forced to treat a pile of crap like it was the finest chocolate. Along the way, Hannah walked in front, pulling her seventh brother Tyler along, while Madison and Victoria trailed behind them with visibly forced expressions. Every step they took carried 7 parts helplessness and 10 parts reluctant compromise under pressure. Designer clothes, imported watches, lace, belts, shoes. The three sisters didn't hold back when it came to spending money, and I accepted everything they offered, looking absolutely delighted. We kept shopping as we walked, as though we were fighting a shopping war without gunfire. Before long, all four of us had our hands full of bags large and small. Some contained things the sisters had bought for themselves, but most of them were gifts they had picked out for me. After shopping for nearly 3 or 4 hours, the sun had already begun to set outside, and the mall gradually shifted into its evening atmosphere. The lighting grew softer and more intimate. By then, all of us were tired and hungry. As the one who had arranged the outing, Hannah had already reserved a restaurant here in advance, an upscale French restaurant on the top floor of Outlet Plaza. She said she wanted to take me to experience an authentic French meal, authentic French cuisine. That actually gave me trouble. I'd lived 2 lives, and the fanciest thing I'd ever eaten was probably steak. But the restaurant these 3 sisters brought me to was the real old-school European deal, an authentic French restaurant opened by an old French aristocratic family. In my previous life, I'd read articles about French cuisine. French dining was one of the classic representatives of European cuisine, and you could even say that much of modern European table etiquette and dining culture had originated from it. It had been standardized and refined during the era of Louis XIV, W, before spreading throughout Europe. That French king, known as the Sun King, had transformed eating into something beyond the food itself, and simply filling one's stomach. It had become a symbol of etiquette and social status. Because of that, this place was nothing like those Western restaurants and novels, where you simply ordered a few dishes with foreign-sounding names and called it a day. Here, you weren't even allowed to order individual dishes. You had to order an entire set meal, following the traditional French dining sequence: aperitif, appetizer, soup, main course, salad, cheese, dessert, coffee, then an after-dinner drink. Not a single stage could be skipped. You could adjust the food within each course according to your taste and personal preferences, choosing whichever option you liked best. But the courses themselves were mandatory, and French dining etiquette wasn't complicated only when it came to ordering and serving food. There was an entire system of manners, from how you sat down and used utensils to how you ate and paired the wine. Everything came with a long list of detailed rules that had to be followed. In my previous life, I'd watched some explanations online, but this was my first time actually experiencing it, and all the knowledge I'd once read about had suddenly become blurry in my head. My eyes were saying, I know this. My brain was saying, sure, no problem. And my hands were saying, what the hell am I supposed to do? That was exactly what was happening right now. I didn't even know how to properly hold the knife and fork, and ended up fumbling all over the place, looking like a complete country bumpkin. So from the moment we sat down, I became half the restaurant's center of attention. My awkward, inexperienced behavior contrasted sharply with my 3 sisters' calm composure, making the difference impossible to miss. 3 Carter sisters had been attending places like this since they were little. Their family had strict rules, and they'd received plenty of training in this kind of etiquette. So now, they carried themselves with complete ease, their manners polished and proper. Exactly like daughters raised in an elite family. As for me, I already didn't know how to use Western utensils properly, and I'd never seriously practiced those online etiquette tutorials. So right now, I looked pretty awkward. Eventually, I could only ask the server for the chopsticks I was most familiar with. That move drew mocking looks from quite a few wealthy or wannabe wealthy diners in the restaurant, who turned to stare at me with amusement. Ding, even the server's eyes carried a trace of contempt. But I didn't care. I didn't act like some other transmigrated protagonist and launch into a speech about how China was a nation of etiquette and had no need to follow the customs of foreign barbarians. Nor did I show even the slightest bit of insecurity. Why should I? I only needed to move at my own pace. As for other people's mockery and attempts to embarrass me, I couldn't care less. Etiquette and little tricks like this were superficial. Only tangible benefits that actually ended up in my hands mattered. I understood that perfectly. Throughout the meal, everyone had their own thoughts, and we didn't talk much. It wasn't until dessert that Hannah finally broke the silence. Galler, you must have suffered a lot all these years. I took a sip of champagne and smiled faintly. Not really. People only eat 3 meals a day and sleep in a space only a few feet wide. Living in luxury is one way to live, and living simply is another. You're not a fish, so how would you know what makes a fish happy? And you're not me, so how would you know whether I was happy? Madison couldn't help blurting out, "Keep pretending." Go ahead, keep pretending. If your life was really that good, then why would you? Before she could finish, Hannah kicked her under the table. Cutting her off? Hannah's eyes were filled with warning and reproach, and she cursed inwardly. "Idiot, use your brain. Watch your mouth." Tyler looked at Madison with amusement and said, "Come on, that's not quite fair. We were born from the same parents, and we're siblings connected by blood. Sure, we've had some conflicts, but that bond still exists. Second sis cares about me this much. I'm not made of stone. How could I not be touched? How could I not cry?" Hannah sighed. "We all came from the same parents. We share the same blood. Even if bones break, the tendons still connect them. Although Madison and Victoria both misunderstood you, you're still family. They've both realized their mistakes, and they've already compensated you so much. Can't you give them another chance and forgive them?" Everything became clear to me. So Hannah was finally playing the emotional card. I gently pushed the pile of clothes and watches on the table and smiled calmly. "You're right, sisses. Family shouldn't hold grudges overnight. But, like you said, as for all these things today, I'm not sure how I should handle them. If they're supposed to be apology gifts, then forget it. You three should take them back, because I've already forgiven you." I signed the settlement agreement and agreed not to pursue the matter any further. I paused, then continued, "It's already over, and I've already forgiven everything. So how could I still accept these things? I'd feel guilty taking them, really guilty." I even looked apologetically at Hannah. Then I suddenly changed direction. "But if these things are gifts from my sisters because you care about your little brother, and you're welcoming me back into the family, then since we're family, I won't put on some fake show of politeness, or pretend I don't want them. Thank you very much for caring about your little brother. In that case, I'll gladly keep everything." The moment I said that, a flash of anger crossed Hannah's eyes. But her expression didn't change at all. She maintained the same calm smile. Madison and Victoria, sitting on either side of Hannah, however, had absolutely priceless expressions. Victoria had never been good at controlling her temper, and unlike Madison or Hannah, all the shopping she'd done today had come directly out of her own savings. For her, it was a considerable amount of money. If they failed to accomplish their goal, then all that money would truly have been wasted. Ignoring the warning look Hannah kept giving her, Victoria snapped angrily, "You bastard. Do you really have to push us this far? I know I went too far that day, but I was locked up for quite a while too, so I've already been punished. Is it really that hard for you to put in a few good words for me in front of Grandpa, so he won't cut off my allowance?" Dauria's voice carried obvious anxiety and dissatisfaction. Hannah's heart sank. She immediately sensed trouble. She knew it. Bringing these two girls along had been a mistake. Her expression turned cold as she said to Victoria, "This was your own mistake, and in Cade, the fact that you're even standing here means Tyler already forgave you. So what are you still blaming him for? Apologize to Tyler right now." Victoria couldn't understand the logic behind any of this. Seeing that Hannah didn't seem to be defending her, she said aggrievedly, "Didn't I already apologize? Didn't he say he forgave me? Then why is Grandpa still cutting off my allowance?" Her two older sisters both had jobs and their own incomes, so they could afford not to care about an allowance. But Victoria was different. She was still a high school student. She had no job, which meant no income. All of her expenses came from her allowance and a credit card, and even then, she sometimes had to ask her parents for extra money. Now Grandpa had cut off her allowance and frozen her card too. So every cent she spent on this outing was one less cent she had left. She'd never had any habit of saving money. The only reason she had anything left this month was because she'd been locked up and couldn't spend it. And the moment she got out, she learned that from now on, she'd only have 2,000 yuan a month for living expenses. How could she not panic? I was secretly delighted. This was actually a perfect opportunity. In these switched-at-birth heir stories, there was always someone who awakened early and realized what was really going on. Maybe I could make Victoria wake up too. With that thought, a plan formed in my mind. But on my face, I put on a troubled expression. Sixth sis. It's not that I don't want to help. It's just that I barely ever see Grandpa. You're kind of asking the impossible. And as for forgiveness, I said helplessly, How could I possibly not forgive you? I already told Grandpa that I'd forgiven all of you. I really don't hold a grudge, and Grandpa's decision has nothing to do with me. You can't force me to overturn Grandpa's decision, can you? Instead of asking me, you'd be better off talking to Grandpa yourself. I'm sure Grandpa will forgive you, right? Victoria didn't listen to my explanation at all. She snorted and said, everyone knows Grandpa values you now. He pays more attention to you than he does to Mom and Dad. So don't say things like that. You just don't want to help, right? It's not that I don't want to. I spread my hands and said with a helpless expression, it's that there's nothing I can do. Victoria stood up angrily and snatched back the gifts she'd bought. I knew it. You really are. Not even half as good as Ethan. I'd rather give my things to a dog than give them to you. With that, she left the table. That had all been her own money. If Hannah hadn't told her to do it, she would have never spent a single cent trying to please the guy sitting in front of her. She'd already lowered herself this much, and yet he was still making excuses. Seeing Victoria leave, Hannah couldn't sit still either. She called after her, then looked at me with disappointment and sadness. Tyler, do things really have to be like this? The family is already in complete chaos. It barely feels like a family anymore. All you need to do is say a few good words to Grandpa. Is that really too much to ask? I let out a sigh. If you hadn't said that, I honestly wouldn't have known I had that much influence. But I don't even have Grandpa's phone number, and I'm not in the family WeChat group either. So I don't even know how to contact him. How about this? I gave her a flattering smile. Why don't you add me to the family WeChat group? Then I can add Grandpa on WeChat and talk to him directly. Inside Hannah's heart, she was already starting to curse. The feeling was like lifting a rock, only to smash it straight onto her own foot. Painful and frustrating. She had never expected that I would ask to join the family group. That immediately put her in a difficult position. The sisters had their own private group chat where they could say whatever they wanted, but the family group was completely different. The moment I joined, it would mean I already had half a foot inside the family's inner circle. Hannah's original plan was to keep me out of the family group, take me to see Grandpa herself, and then personally escort me away afterward. That way, I would remain outside the family, without being completely cut off. And I still wouldn't be able to enter the family's core circle, but once I entered the family group, that would mean I had a direct way to contact any member of the family. The Carter family itself was relatively simple. Grandpa's generation had a single direct line, with no brothers or sisters. So there were almost no aunts, uncles, or other relatives on that side, but Grandma's side was much more complicated. Her family had always followed Grandpa, but unlike his side, Grandma's family had far more children. There were 2 sons and 3 daughters. The eldest son inherited the family's domestic businesses. The second son went overseas and took over the family's international operations. Among the 3 daughters, the eldest was Hannah's mother, Grace. The second and third both passed the civil service exams and entered government work. And those relatives seemed to have no direct conflict of interest with me, but anyone intelligent could see that joining that group would bring me nothing but advantages, especially if I entered the group and built good relationships with those elders. Then, if I eventually returned to the Carter family and wanted to take control of the entire family, there would be almost nothing standing in my way. More importantly, there was one person in that group Hannah least wanted me to contact. Now that I'd made this request, there was no reasonable way for Hannah to refuse. And she couldn't create a fake group to fool me either. After this first round of confrontation today, she felt that the young man sitting before her was even more cunning than she'd expected, and far harder to deal with, even though I didn't use the Carter surname. And my adoptive parents clearly disliked the family. I still wanted access to the family group. That was something Hannah had never anticipated. She looked at me, her heart filled with caution and vigilance. Is that not okay? I put on a wounded expression and pushed the things in front of me away, my voice trembling slightly. Money is just something outside the body. Whether these things are apology gifts or presents to welcome me home, I don't really care about any of them. From beginning to end, all I've wanted was a little warmth from a family and some care and love from my biological sisters. As I spoke, my eyes reddened as though I were about to cry. Even my voice became choked with emotion. Why? Why lie to me? Why give me hope just to deceive me again? I know I don't use the Carter surname right now, but I did that for you, Mom, and Dad too. I know you've raised Ethan for more than 10 years. I know you have deep feelings for him. So I never demanded that he leave. I never said you had to change your feelings immediately, or accept me right away. I only wanted to try, little by little, to become part of this family. My voice was filled with pleading and longing. I only hoped that some of the love and care you've given Ethan could also be shared with me. Even just a tiny little bit. That would have been enough to make me happy. Then, my gaze suddenly sharpened and locked directly onto Hannah. But now, you won't even let me join a simple family group. Got even that? Sis, do you really care about me? Or do you actually not care at all, and never wanted to? Was everything you showed me just an act? After saying that, I slowly rose to my feet. I cried out, I knew it. I never should have expected any of this. You two aren't my sisters. You're the precious young ladies of the Carter family. I'm just some outsider who had the nerve to reach above my station. I'm leaving. From now on, we'll go our separate ways. As I spoke, I wiped away my tears, crying so pitifully it almost looked real. My body swayed as though I'd suffered a devastating blow, staggering slightly, like someone whose heart had been completely shattered, walking alone down an empty street. One heavy step after another as I slowly headed away. Damn it, Hannah's heart sank. She quickly looked around and realized several nosy diners in the restaurant had already pulled out their phones to record us. This was wrong, completely wrong. If Tyler walked out that door now, then in Grandpa's eyes, she would immediately become a hypocrite, cold-hearted and completely two-faced. Tyler, Hannah called anxiously. She knew that no matter what happened, she had to protect the image she'd built first. It's not like that. I didn't give her even the slightest chance to explain. Instead, I became even more emotional. Do I not even have the right to join one family group? I already said, I don't want your gifts. I don't want anything. I just want all of you to acknowledge me. I just want to return to the family that gave me life. Is even that too much to ask? My voice was filled with despair and anger. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable, am I? I've tolerated the adopted son, Ethan Carter, the one who took my place, staying in the Carter family. Mom and Dad said that to protect Ethan's feelings, I wasn't allowed to change my last name. I wasn't allowed to transfer my household registration. I wasn't even allowed to live in a normal bedroom. They made me sleep in a storage room, and I accepted all of it. I did everything they asked. I didn't fight him. I didn't try to take anything from him. What more do you want from me? It's just a family group chat. Why am I the only one who can't join? My eyes were filled with accusation and unwillingness. Hannah was cursing internally, but she still had to force an awkward smile and try to comfort me, while desperately searching for an excuse. However, at that moment, she felt completely trapped and helpless. Madison stayed off to the side without saying anything, watching the scene with secret satisfaction. 6 slaps had nearly destroyed her career, and she'd been forced to pay out so much money. She had known for a while that this little brother wasn't simple. The whole reason she'd come along was to watch the confrontation in person and see how her second sister would deal with their real 7th brother. Even fighting him to a draw would have been good enough. At least then there would be someone in the family who could stand against him. But now, watching Hannah trap herself with her own plan was honestly kind of satisfying. Sis, stop looking for excuses. I had already seen through Hannah's thoughts. I stood up directly and said with absolute determination, in your heart, I'm not worthy of being part of the Carter family, and I'm not even worthy of joining the group. I'm leaving. The moment I said that, Hannah's heart sank to the bottom. She knew that from this point on, no excuse she came up with would work. And if Grandpa heard about this, she'd probably have no choice but to pack her bags and crawl back to the capital in disgrace. Worse, she might even receive the same punishment as Victoria and lose the family's financial support. It's just a group chat. Hannah gritted her teeth and made the decision, forcing down her anger and unwillingness. Tyler, that's not what I meant. Only then did I wipe away my tears. I took out my phone and added Hannah as a contact. Then she pulled me into the family group chat. Well, look at that. Grandpa's eldest grandson is finally here. The family group instantly became lively. Lord of half the city was the first to send the message. Welcome home, young master. Traveler followed right behind. So, this is our real nephew? Someone asked curiously. Watching the group explode with activity, Hannah's heart was filled with resentment and fury. She hated herself for letting Tyler push her this far, and hated how helplessly she had allowed him into the family group. Thanks, second sisses. I instantly changed my expression, looking completely delighted. I picked up the gifts. I knew it. Second sis treats me so well. I'll head back now. I've got something important tomorrow. Bye, sis. With my goal accomplished, I grabbed the bags and left, leaving Madison and Hannah staring at each other. Second sis, Madison asked with obvious schadenfreude. What do we do now? That little bastard. Anna could no longer maintain even the slightest trace of gentleness. She dropped the act completely, picked up her champagne, and drained it in one gulp, then gritted her teeth. Let's go to the Lin family. Meanwhile, I was walking toward the underground garage in complete satisfaction, phone in hand. I quickly found Victoria's WeChat account and checked it. The girl hadn't restricted access to her moments, so they were publicly visible. I browsed through them for a while, and eventually identified one particular person. I had just taken a screenshot of the photo when a new friend request suddenly appeared. It came from someone in the family group. Which sister is this? I frowned slightly. I actually had no interest in adding these people, and was about to reject it when the reason attached to the request made my pupils contract. The username was cutting off the past, and the request message read, I have something you want, a way to replenish spiritual energy. How does she know? My heart jumped. I really was worried about running out of spiritual energy. The jade bracelet contained a limited amount, and every bit I used was gone forever. I'd reached the point where I barely even dared cultivate anymore. As for the things my master in the dream had told me could assist cultivation, most of them had already disappeared in the modern age, and even if some survived, they were treasured by other cultivators. They were practically their lifeblood. There was no way they'd sell them. That was why my master hoped that in this new era, I could carve out an entirely new path of cultivation. So how did this person know? My heart was filled with confusion and curiosity. I accepted the request. Let's see what she was really after. My name is Emma Lin. I'm the fourth child of the Lin family. Technically speaking, I'm your fiancé. Cutting off the past, immediately send another message. My dad is a close friend of your dad. And when your grandfather first took control of the Carter family, my grandfather helped him too. So our families arranged our engagement when we were still babies. The two of us are actually pretty similar. You went missing when you were little, and I was switched at birth by a nanny. I only returned to the Lin family a year ago. Today, I decided to cut ties with them. I have nowhere to go. Can you let me stay with you for one night? I have something you want. Emma's message left me completely stunned. Wait, seriously? This was a thing too? I was speechless. Actually, I'd thought about this before. According to the usual formula of switched at birth heir stories, I was supposed to have some blind, foolish fiancé who constantly defended the fake heir. I'd assumed that after everything involving Ethan, that fiancé would definitely jump out immediately and start causing trouble for me, but she'd never appeared. So eventually, I'd forgotten about her. Now, though, I needed to sort this out. If she came from one of those switched at birth heiress stories, and she was the real daughter, then, according to how those stories usually worked, the real daughter probably hadn't been publicly acknowledged and might currently be staying with the family under the identity of some relative's daughter, if the engagement still existed, and hadn't changed after the real daughter returned. Then, that meant my supposed fiancé was actually the fake heiress from her switched at birth story, and if that was true, then the real heiress had already completed her first timeline. If so, this world had actually been reset once already, which meant the original Tyler wasn't really a first-run player. He was already on his second run, but then why didn't the original body's memories, Ting Porty, contain anything from the first timeline? The more I thought about it, the more interesting it became. A playful smile curled at the corner of my mouth. I decided to meet this so-called fiancé of mine. Send me your location. I'll come pick you up, I replied. I was actually getting curious. What kind of surprise? Could this second-run player possibly bring me? The moment I got back into the car, I quickly explained the situation to Ryan, then took the phone and confirmed the location. After that, I sank into the original Tyler's memories. According to the usual formula of switched at-birth heir stories, this fiancée of mine should have two obvious traits. First, she'd be breathtakingly beautiful, practically goddess level, and second, she'd be blind to the truth and hopelessly foolish. No, wait, more accurately, first, she should be the daughter of some top-tier family in Jianghai City. Second, that family should probably be declining, and desperately need support from the Carter family. But why wasn't there anyone like that? I carefully searched through my memories. Yet among Jianghai City's wealthy families, there wasn't a single major family named Lin. Now that was strange. Marriage alliances between wealthy families weren't unusual. What was strange was why the other family was so obscure. Ryan, I had no choice but to ask him, does Jianghai City have some hidden wealthy family nobody knows about? What? Ryan looked completely speechless. Tyler, what the hell are you thinking about? If you think you're the male lead, then you're in a modern urban power fantasy story, not some ancient romance novel. Where would a hidden aristocratic family come from in modern times? Then what about this Lin family? I asked in confusion. There isn't any major Lin family in Jianghai City. Why are you thinking so hard about it? Ryan waved dismissively. When you meet your future wife, just ask her yourself. Fair enough. I narrowed my eyes and looked out the window, feeling increasingly curious about what kind of surprise this second-run player might bring me. Emma Lin was also currently in the Port Trade District, more specifically, near Jinshu Garden, across from the Phase 3 Villa District, at a JD-operated convenience store. Without traffic, it was about a 20-minute drive from Outlet Plaza. To get there, traffic was a little heavy today, so it took us more than 30 minutes. The moment we arrived, I spotted a disheveled young girl who looked like she'd just been humiliated. She wore a faded school uniform and carried an old backpack as she stood outside the JD convenience store looking around. Tyler, just then, Ryan suddenly pointed toward a car approaching ahead of us. Look, isn't that your second sister's car? I followed the direction Ryan was pointing and saw a Maybach entering the Villa District. Its headlights were on, so I couldn't make out the license plate fit about them. I narrowed my eyes. If it really was Hannah, and she'd left the family gathering to come all the way here, then the most likely reason was probably this fiancé of mine, but that could wait. I patted Ryan on the shoulder and said, see that girl over there? Drive over to her. Ryan followed my gaze and immediately frowned. You're sure it's that little girl? You're sure she's some rich family's daughter? You're sure you're not being scammed? That's her? I nodded and said with absolute certainty, no doubt about it. In rebirth stories about switched-at-birth heirs, or switched-at-birth daughters, the second-run protagonist almost always starts out looking exactly like this. There's a 99.99% chance that's her. Seeing how certain I was, Ryan stopped arguing and drove over. He lowered the window, and the girl looked into the car with a hint of surprise. I'd already cleared a seat for her and said gently, get in. I'm the person you're looking for. So you're my theoretical fiancé? Emma looked completely unguarded. She opened the door and climbed straight in, then settled in as casually as if it were her own car, and looked me over. Not bad. You're much more handsome than I expected. Handsome? That was practically standard equipment for transmigrators. And for the true heir in a switched-at-birth story, my adoptive parents were both good-looking, and my biological parents were both top-tier in appearance, only slightly below the legendary beauty of the readers themselves. Naturally, I'd inherited my looks from my biological parents. Even if I became some rich woman's pretty boy, I'd still be top-tier among pretty boys. You seem to trust me a lot. I studied the girl and thought to myself, is she some kind of naive sweetheart? She has absolutely no sense of caution. Is it because you met me in your first life? That aside, as the fiancé in a rich heir story, Emma's looks definitely qualified. She was the kind of beauty you'd compare to a top-tier celebrity, as gorgeous as any reader's dream girlfriend. She simply hadn't fully grown into her features yet, and she currently looked exactly like the real heiress in one of those novels. Her forehead was wrapped in gauze. There was a clear handprint on her face. Her body was painfully thin. Her hair was dry, and obviously hadn't been cared for properly. She looked severely malnourished, as if she hadn't eaten a proper meal in a long time. So how could I still tell she was beautiful? Because true beauty showed in the bone structure, judging from the shape of her face. Once she got proper nutrition, she'd quickly become bright and beautiful again. What? Ryan froze, then complained in disbelief. Tyler, are you saying, Ryan? I decided to prepare him in advance and said, seriously, don't be surprised. You're going to discover very soon that in this world, there are certain special people and another side of reality ordinary people can never touch. Ryan was about to make another sarcastic comment, but then he suddenly remembered my jade bracelet and everything he'd heard at the hospital. At first, he'd assumed it was all just mysterious superstition, but now, could it actually be real? Ryan's eyes suddenly lit up, and anticipation filled him. We're still too weak. I gave him a vague but affirmative answer. I've only touched the edge of that world. I'm not qualified to truly step inside yet. Emma looked surprised too, but then nodded with certainty. So you really aren't simple. Thinking about how her greatest secret had just been exposed by the man who was, theoretically, her fiancé, she couldn't help asking curiously, how did you know? That I've already lived once and been reborn, because switched at birth heir stories and switched at birth heiress stories always work like this. I glanced at Emma, then slowly continued. In the first life, you crave family love. So you put up with blind, foolish brothers and parents who emotionally and physically destroy you. Then the fake daughter frames you again and again until you eventually die. Either you reincarnate immediately or your soul lingers after death and watches everything that happens afterward while learning all kinds of skills. Then you return to the past, and your current situation looks exactly like the opening of a Second Life revenge arc. I said with certainty. You were probably falsely accused again. This time you finally refused to take it. So you fought back, wrote a letter cutting ties with your family, and ran away. What? Emma froze too. There are actually novels like that? You don't read novels? I was surprised too. Oh, right. If I remember the usual backstory in Switched at Birth heiress novels, the nanny who switched you at birth probably treated you like a servant and made you do all the dirty work. And even after you returned to the family a year ago, you still didn't live well. So you probably never had time to read this kind of story. Are you still using some ancient phone? Like one of those old basic handsets. No proper smartphone? I continued asking. Oh, wait, you joined the family? Group chat. So you're probably using some old smartphone somebody else discarded. One that practically freezes just opening WeChat, right? Emma silently nodded, thinking to herself, how does this fiancé of mine know everything so clearly? Good enough. I immediately turned to Ryan. Ryan, drive straight to the military hospital. She's getting a full physical examination. The hospital? Emma clearly didn't want to go there. As someone who had been reborn, she had originally planned to use some of the information she knew to gain a little leverage over this fiancé who might help her get revenge. But why did everything feel so different from her first life? In her first life, she had never even met Tyler.